The moment Marcus Wells adjusted his counterfeit law degree on the mahogany wall, he knew this con would be different from all the others. Standing in his rented office with second-hand furniture and borrowed confidence, he never imagined that the desperate woman clutching medical bills in the waiting room would change everything he believed about justice, power, and his own moral compass. As Mayor Holloway's black SUV pulled up outside the small county hospital where Maria Rodriguez fought for her life, Marcus realized he had only hours to choose between walking away with his freedom or standing up to the most dangerous man in town with nothing but bluffed legal knowledge and raw determination. What dark secret connects the corrupt mayor to this struggling single mother? And how far will our unlikely hero go when he discovers the truth? Subscribe to our channel for more stories that will leave you questioning what true justice really means. Elena Rodriguez sat across from Marcus, her eyes red-rimmed and hands trembling slightly, as she organized a stack of medical bills on his desk. "It's my sister, Maria. She needs help that I can't give her." Her voice cracked. "The hospital won't approve her treatment unless—" Marcus nodded professionally, though inwardly he calculated how much he could reasonably charge for this consultation. His law practice had been open for only 3 weeks in Riverside, a town just small enough that people didn't immediately question his credentials, but large enough to provide a steady flow of clients. "They're going to let my sister die, unless someone stops him," Elena whispered. "Him?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Mayor Holloway. He controls everything in this town, including the hospital board." The following morning, Marcus straightened his thrift store tie and strode through the automatic doors of Riverside County Hospital with a confidence he didn't feel. The antiseptic smell hit him immediately, bringing back unwelcome memories of his mother's final days. Room 307 was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment. Maria Rodriguez lay motionless, an oxygen mask covering her face, her skin ashen against white sheets. "Are you family?" Marcus turned to see a petite woman in a white coat, dark circles under her eyes suggesting long shifts and little sleep. "I'm Marcus Wells, Elena Rodriguez's attorney." The lie came easily after years of practice. "And you are?" "Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm overseeing Maria's care." She glanced at Maria's chart. "Though care might be an overstatement given the restrictions I'm working under." Marcus lowered his voice. "Elena mentioned something about treatment being denied." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "Maria needs a specialized immunotherapy that the hospital board refuses to approve. Without it," she left the sentence unfinished. "Cost? Around $150,000. Insurance would normally cover most of it, but there's been a review that's suspiciously open-ended." Marcus frowned. "That doesn't sound legal." "It's not about legality." Dr. Chen leaned closer. "It's about Mayor Holloway and his friends on the hospital board. They've been cutting corners on treatments, especially for patients from the East Side." Elena had mentioned the East Side, predominantly Hispanic, working class, and the focus of the mayor's recent urban renewal initiatives, which mostly seemed to involve pushing residents out. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion. In the hallway, a deep voice boomed orders as nurses scattered like startled birds. Dr. Chen tensed. "Speak of the devil." Through the doorway, Marcus saw an imposing man in an expensive suit striding down the corridor, flanked by 2 security guards and the nervous hospital administrator. "That's him?" Marcus whispered. Dr. Chen nodded. "Mayor Richard Holloway, making his weekly hospital visit to remind everyone who really runs things around here." Marcus slipped into the bathroom as the entourage approached. Through the partially open door, he watched Holloway pause outside Maria's room, checking a tablet handed to him by the administrator. "Rodriguez, still here?" The mayor's voice was smooth as oil. "I thought we discussed prioritizing beds for patients with better outcomes." "Her condition is stable, Mayor, but—" the administrator began. "Stable means she can be moved. We have paying patients waiting." Holloway glanced into the room dismissively. "Handle it." As the group moved on, Marcus caught the cold calculation. In the mayor's eyes, not cruelty exactly, but something perhaps more dangerous. Complete indifference to human suffering when it conflicted with his plans. Dr. Chen appeared at his side, her face tight with anger. "Now you understand what we're up against." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling something unfamiliar stir within him. Not the usual thrill of a con taking shape, but something that felt uncomfortably like genuine moral outrage. "I think I do," he said quietly, watching the mayor's retreating back. "And I think Elena was right to come find me." Marcus spent the afternoon in Riverside's modest public library, searching online for information about Mayor Richard Holloway. The story was familiar, former real estate developer who'd promised to revitalize the struggling town 5 years ago, winning by a narrow margin against a long-serving mayor. Since then, he'd been re-elected once, with a substantially wider margin. The official biography painted Holloway as a local success story, born to middle-class parents, built a small construction company into a regional development firm, then answered the call to public service. Photos showed him cutting ribbons, shaking hands with business leaders, standing with his arm around his elegant wife at charity galas. But something didn't add up. Marcus pulled up the town's financial records, which were public but buried in the municipal website. Tax revenues had increased moderately, but infrastructure spending had decreased. Meanwhile, the mayor's office budget had nearly doubled. Digging for dirt, Marcus looked up to see an older woman with steel-gray hair watching him with amusement. Her hospital ID badge read, "Diane Winters, Administrative Services. Just educating myself about local politics," Marcus said carefully. Diane pulled out a chair and sat without waiting for an invitation. "I saw you at the hospital earlier. With Dr. Chen." Marcus tensed. "Just visiting a client's family member." "Relax, counselor. I'm not one of Holloway's people." She glanced at his screen. "Though if you're looking into our mayor, you're not going to find the real story in those press releases." "And where would I find the real story?" Diane lowered her voice. "The real story is about a hospital that used to serve everyone in this community, until Holloway's friends started running the board. It's about a mayor who promised better health care, but has cut services every year while somehow finding money for luxury condos downtown." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Dr. Chen said you're asking questions about Maria Rodriguez's case." Diane's eyes hardened. "I've worked at that hospital for 30 years. What's happening now isn't just bad management, it's wrong." Marcus studied her, weighing the risk. "What can you tell me about the hospital finances?" "I can tell you funds that should be going to patient care are being diverted. I can tell you treatment approvals are being decided based on patients' addresses and surnames." Diane slid a folded paper across the table. "And I can tell you where to look for proof." The paper contained an internal hospital server address and a login. "Why not take this to the authorities yourself?" "I've tried. The county prosecutor is Holloway's former business partner. The state regulatory board is underfunded and backlogged. And I need this job." She stood up. "But you're an outsider. Maybe you'll have better luck." After Diane left, Marcus found a quieter corner of the library to access the hospital's financial records using the login she'd provided. What he found confirmed her claims. Systematic reallocation of funds from patient care to facilities improvement and administrative services, with large contracts consistently going to companies connected to Holloway's former business associates. Most disturbing was a pattern in treatment denials. Patients from certain neighborhoods, particularly those with Hispanic surnames, faced rejection rates 3 times higher than others. As darkness fell outside, Marcus gathered his things, mind racing with implications. This wasn't just about one patient. It was systematic corruption affecting hundreds of vulnerable people. Walking back to his rented apartment above a laundromat, Marcus felt the weight of someone's gaze. Across the street, a black SUV idled, its windows tinted. As Marcus quickened his pace, the vehicle pulled away from the curb, following at a distance. His heart pounding, Marcus ducked into a busy diner, threading through tables to the kitchen and out the back door. He waited in the shadows until he was certain he'd lost his tail, then took a circuitous route home. Inside his sparse apartment, Marcus checked the locks twice before dropping onto his second-hand sofa. The smart play was clear. Pack up, move on, find another town and another con. He wasn't a real lawyer, and taking on a corrupt mayor was far outside his usual schemes. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Careful where you dig, Mr. Wells. Some holes are too deep to climb out of." Marcus stared at the message, feeling the familiar cold tightness in his chest. The warning sign that a con was turning dangerous. This was the moment to walk away. But the image of Maria Rodriguez, fighting for her life while bureaucrats calculated the value of that life in dollars and cents, kept intruding on his thoughts. And beneath that, the memory of another hospital room, another woman whose treatment came too late because there was no one to fight for her. His mother. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering her face, thin and pale against hospital pillows. The doctor's apologetic explanations about insurance limitations. The helplessness he'd felt as a 19-year-old watching her slip away. He'd promised himself then that he'd never be powerless again, that he'd find ways to work the system that had failed her. That promise had led him to become a con man, using his talents to survive rather than fight. Maybe it was time that changed. The Riverside Public Library closed at 9 p.m., but Marcus had befriended the night janitor with strategic coffee deliveries and $20 bills. Tonight, that investment paid off as he hunched over legal textbooks in a back corner, the only light coming from a small desk lamp. Medical law is a beast, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. 4 hours of research had yielded a crushing realization. He was out of his depth. His usual cons involved just enough legal knowledge to sound convincing. To laypeople, this was different. Lives were at stake. Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability in health programs or activities, he read aloud, trying to commit the language to memory. True, but you'll want to focus on the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act if you're fighting a hospital. Marcus's head snapped up. An elderly man stood at the end of the table, leaning on a wooden cane. Library's closed, Marcus said cautiously. Indeed it is. The man smiled, easing himself into a chair opposite Marcus. Which makes me curious about what you're doing here, and what poor Jimmy's getting paid to look the other way. Marcus began, gathering his papers. Just leaving. Hold on, son. The man raised a gnarled hand. I'm not here to make trouble. Name's Vincent Russo. Folks call me Vince. 43 years as a paralegal at Riverside Legal Aid before they shut us down last year. He nodded at the books spread across the table. You're researching medical law. Mind if I ask why? Marcus hesitated, weighing his options. I have a client being denied treatment. You're the new lawyer in town. Harvard, right? Vince's eyes twinkled. Except Harvard doesn't teach case law the way you're approaching it. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation that preceded a con falling apart. Relax, Vince said. I'm not here to expose you. But if you're going up against Riverside General, and by extension, our esteemed mayor, you're going to need help from someone who knows the local landscape. Why would you help me if you know I'm not? Marcus trailed off, unwilling to admit it aloud. Not a real lawyer? Vince shrugged. Because I spent my career helping people who couldn't get justice any other way. Because this town needs someone willing to challenge Holloway. And because, he tapped one of the books, anyone spending their night reading medical statutes instead of running when things get tough has my respect. For the next 3 hours, Vince guided Marcus through relevant case law, explaining precedents and procedures that would have taken days to research alone. The old paralegal's knowledge was encyclopedic, his explanations clear and practical. The key is Dixon versus University Hospital, Vince explained, opening a thick casebook. Established that denying approved treatments based on administrative, rather than medical factors constitutes a breach of duty of care. That's your angle. By 2 a.m. they had outlined a legal strategy to force the hospital to approve Maria's treatment, an emergency injunction based on both discrimination claims and the precedent in Dixon. This is solid, Marcus said, reviewing their notes with growing confidence. It's a start, Vince corrected, but there's something else you should know about Holloway. Vince pulled out a folder from his worn leather satchel. I've been keeping track of our mayor's business dealings since he took office. Notice anything interesting? The folder contained newspaper clippings, property records, and city council minutes. Marcus scanned them quickly, then more carefully. As a pattern emerged, Holloway has financial ties to Medcor Pharmaceuticals, he said slowly. Bingo. The same company that makes an expensive alternative to the treatment Maria Rodriguez needs. So denying her treatment isn't just about saving money. It's about forcing patients onto medications that benefit Holloway financially. Now, you're thinking like a real lawyer. Vince smiled grimly. Conflict of interest, influence peddling, possibly even kickbacks. Marcus leaned back, mind racing. This is bigger than one patient. Much bigger. Vince gathered his papers. Question is, what are you going to do about it? File the emergency injunction tomorrow. Force the hospital to approve Maria's treatment. Then keep digging into Holloway's pharmaceutical connections. Vince nodded approvingly. Good start. But be careful. Holloway didn't get where he is by playing fair, and he won't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens his interests. I'm counting on it, Marcus said, a plan forming in his mind. In fact, I'm going to give him a very public target to aim at. Walking home in the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. His cons had always been about survival, about taking what he needed from a world that had taken so much from him. This was different. This Mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Maria's condition worsening. Hospital administrators talking about comfort measures only. Need legal intervention ASAP. Marcus quickened his pace. There was no time to waste. He'd have to file the injunction first thing in the morning, forcing a hearing before a judge. It was a risky move, drawing immediate attention to himself and his questionable credentials. But Maria Rodriguez was running out of time. Back in his apartment, Marcus worked until sunrise, drafting legal documents based on Vince's guidance. The language was dense, the citations numerous. But the core argument was simple. The hospital was illegally discriminating against a patient based on her ethnicity and economic status, while the mayor's financial interests represented a clear conflict of interest in treatment decisions. As he finalized the documents, Marcus knew he was crossing a line. This wasn't a con anymore. It was a crusade, and for the first time in his checkered career, that felt right. The Riverside County Courthouse stood like a weathered sentinel in the town square, its limestone facade darkened by decades of industrial pollution. Marcus climbed the worn steps, legal briefcase in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. Inside, his jacket pocket, Sophia's crayon thank you card rested like a talisman. The courtroom assigned for emergency hearings was smaller than he'd expected, with wooden pews that creaked under the weight of spectators. Elena sat in the front row, dark circles under her eyes suggesting another sleepless night at her sister's bedside. Behind her, Dr. Chen fidgeted with her hospital ID badge, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. All rise. The Honorable Judge, James Patterson presiding. Marcus stood on legs that threatened to betray him as the judge entered. A tall, lean man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they touched. "Be seated," Judge Patterson said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a southerner long transplanted north. "I understand we have an emergency injunction request. Rodriguez versus Riverside General Hospital." He peered over reading glasses. "Counsel, identify yourselves for the record." "Marcus Wells, representing the plaintiff, Your Honor." Marcus's voice sounded steadier than he felt. "Lawrence Simmons, representing Riverside General Hospital." The man at the other table rose, middle-aged, impeccably dressed, exuding confidence. "Judge." Patterson nodded. "Mr. Wells, this is quite a bold filing for someone who's only recently joined our local bar. Present your case." Marcus took a deep breath and approached the podium. The legal arguments Vince had helped him prepare swirled in his mind, threatening to dissolve into incomprehensible fragments. He glanced at Elena, whose eyes shone with desperate hope. "Your Honor, Maria Rodriguez is currently a patient at Riverside General Hospital, suffering from an autoimmune condition that requires specialized immunotherapy. Despite this treatment being covered by her insurance and recommended by her physician, the hospital administration has repeatedly denied approval. So far so good. Stick to the facts. We contend that this denial constitutes discrimination under Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, as Ms. Rodriguez is being treated differently than other patients with similar medical needs, but different ethnic backgrounds." Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Wells." "We have the data to support it, Your Honor." Marcus presented the statistics he and Vince had compiled, showing the disparity in treatment approvals between Hispanic patients and others. As he gained confidence, Marcus referenced Dixon versus University Hospital, detailing how administrative factors were improperly influencing medical decisions. The legal terminology flowed more naturally with each passing minute. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we've uncovered evidence suggesting a troubling conflict of interest." Marcus hesitated, knowing he was about to cross a line that would make Holloway his sworn enemy. Mayor Richard Holloway, who appoints the hospital board members, has undisclosed financial ties to Medcore Pharmaceuticals, which stands to benefit if patients are denied the treatment Ms. Rodriguez needs. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Patterson gavelled for silence. "Those are extraordinary claims, Mr. Wells. I assume you have evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus presented the documents Vince had provided, along with the hospital financial records Diane had helped him access. Throughout his presentation, Marcus was acutely aware of Simmons watching him with narrowed eyes. The hospital's lawyer hadn't interrupted or objected, which was more worrying than if he'd fought every point. When Marcus finished, Judge Patterson turned to Simmons. "Counsel?" Simmons rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the hospital categorically denies any discrimination in treatment decisions. These are made based on medical necessity, prognosis, and available resources." He presented counter statistics suggesting the disparities were coincidental rather than systemic. Then his tone changed. However, before addressing the substantive issues, I must raise a preliminary matter of grave concern. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mr. Wells is perpetrating a fraud upon this court. Simmons produced a folder of his own. We've contacted Harvard Law School, where Mr. Wells claims to have graduated in 2015. They have no record of his attendance or graduation. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus could feel Elena's eyes on him, confusion giving way to dawning horror. Furthermore, Simmons continued, we've discovered that Mr. Wells has a history of similar impersonations in at least 3 other states. He is not and has never been a licensed attorney. Judge Patterson's gaze hardened as it settled on Marcus. Is this true, Mr. Wells? The moment stretched into eternity. Marcus could feel his carefully constructed identity crumbling around him. His mind raced through options: denial, evasion, a hasty exit. None would work. Your Honor, he began, his voice barely audible. The validity of my credentials has no bearing on the validity of Ms. Rodriguez's case. That's not an answer, Mr. Wells. Marcus straightened his shoulders. The evidence I've presented is real. The discrimination is real. The conflict of interest is real. Maria Rodriguez is dying while bureaucrats and businessmen decide her treatment based on profit rather than medical necessity. Mr. Wells, Judge Abe, Patterson's voice cut like steel. Are you or are you not a licensed attorney? The courtroom held its breath. No, Your Honor, I am not. The admission felt like tearing off a bandage. Painful but somehow cleansing. Judge Patterson's gavel came down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. This hearing is suspended. Mr. Wells, you are held in contempt of court for practicing law without a license and perpetrating a fraud. Bailiff, take him into custody. As the bailiff approached, Marcus turned to Elena. I'm sorry. The case is still valid. Find a real lawyer. The bailiff's hand closed around his arm, cutting him off. As he was led away, Marcus caught a glimpse of Simmons smiling coldly, cell phone already at his ear, undoubtedly calling Mayor Holloway with the good news. In the corridor outside, reporters who'd caught wind of the dramatic allegations against the mayor now swarmed around the spectacle of Marcus being led away in disgrace. Mr. Wells, is it true you're not a real lawyer? Why did you fake your credentials? What about your accusations against Mayor Holloway? Marcus kept his head down, shame burning through him. Not for being caught. He'd been caught before. But for failing Elena, for failing Maria, for failing himself. He'd tried to do the right thing the wrong way, and now everything was worse than when he started. As the courthouse doors closed behind him, Marcus wondered if this time there would be no walking away, no fresh start in a new town. This time, he might have to pay the full price for his deceptions. The holding cell in the Riverside County Courthouse was small and cold, with concrete benches and the lingering smell of disinfectant. Marcus sat with his head in his hands, the events of the morning playing on repeat in his mind. Mr. Wells. He looked up to see Judge Patterson standing outside the cell, hands clasped behind his back. Your Honor? Marcus rose automatically. Sit. The judge waited as a deputy unlocked the cell door, then stepped inside. This is highly irregular, but I wanted to speak with you privately. Marcus remained silent, unsure what to expect. You committed fraud in my courtroom. You impersonated an officer of the court. These are serious offenses. Judge Patterson's voice was stern but not angry. Yet the evidence you presented about Mayor Holloway and the hospital is troubling. It's all true, Marcus said quietly. Every bit of it, perhaps, but tainted by your methods. The judge studied him. Why? Why go to these lengths for a woman you barely know? Marcus considered lying. Another con, another manipulation. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. My mother died because she couldn't get the treatment she needed. Insurance denials, administrative delays, the same things happening to Maria Rodriguez. No one fought for my mother. I wasn't going to let that happen again. Judge Patterson nodded slowly. Noble intentions, ignoble methods, a familiar story. He sighed. I'm releasing you on your own recognizance until a formal hearing next week. Do not leave town, do not practice law or pretend to. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus blinked in surprise. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're still facing serious charges. The judge paused at the cell door. And Mr. Wells, if there's truth to your allegations about Holloway, find a legitimate way to prove it. The court can't act on tainted evidence. After being processed and released, Marcus stepped outside to find Elena waiting, her expression a complex mixture of anger, disappointment, and concern. You lied to me, she said simply. Yes. Why? Because that's what I do. It's who I am. Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. Or who I was. I don't know anymore. Did you lie about being able to help Maria? No. Everything I told you about her case is true. The hospital is discriminating. Holloway is corrupt. But now my credibility is shot and the case is in limbo. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Miguel is waiting in the car. He has questions about what happened. Miguel? My son. He's 16. Elena's expression softened slightly. He's good with computers. Very good. He heard everything in court today and has ideas. An hour later, Marcus sat at Elena's kitchen table, where Miguel Rodriguez had set up a laptop and was explaining his plan with the boundless confidence of youth. The city's property records are digitized but not well secured, Miguel said, fingers flying across the keyboard. And the hospital's internal network has vulnerabilities I can exploit. Miguel, Marcus interrupted, what you're suggesting is illegal. So is pretending to be a lawyer, Miguel countered, eyes never leaving the screen. And look how well that turned out, Marcus sighed. We need evidence that will stand up in court, not get thrown out because of how we obtained it. What if we look at public records first? Elena suggested. Property transactions, building permits, things anyone can access legally. Marcus nodded slowly. That could work. We focus on the connection between Holloway's development company and the hospital. Expansion. Over the next 3 days, they built a paper trail. Miguel searched public databases while Marcus and Elena visited the county records office, requesting documents that connected Holloway's business interests to hospital land purchases. The pattern that emerged was damning. Before becoming mayor, Holloway had purchased land around the hospital through shell companies. After taking office, he'd pushed through zoning changes that dramatically increased the property values, then leased the land back to the hospital at inflated rates. This proves the conflict of interest, Marcus said, reviewing their findings. But we need more to connect it directly to patient care decisions. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While searching City Hall archives for planning committee minutes, Marcus discovered a maintenance door to the records room had been left unlocked. Inside, he found boxes of documents not yet digitized, including correspondence between Holloway and Medcore Pharmaceuticals, dating back 5 years. These should have been disclosed as part of his financial interests, Marcus whispered, photographing the letters with his phone. This is the smoking gun. As he was finishing, voices approached in the hallway. Marcus slipped out a side door just as the city clerk returned with a maintenance worker. Heart pounding, he walked calmly to his car, the evidence safely stored on his phone. That evening, as they organized their findings at Elena's kitchen table, a black sedan pulled up outside. Through the window, Marcus saw a man in a suit approaching the front door. It's Simmons, he said quietly, the hospital's lawyer. Elena looked alarmed. How did he know you'd be here? Before Marcus could answer, there was a knock at the door. Miguel quickly closed his laptop while Elena went to answer. Ms. Rodriguez. Simmons's smooth voice carried through the house. I apologize for the unannounced visit. Mayor Holloway asked me to speak with you regarding your sister's situation. Marcus moved to the hallway, staying out of sight, but close enough to hear. The mayor has reviewed Maria's case personally, Simmons continued. And in light of the circumstances, he's prepared to make an extraordinary offer. Elena stood in the doorway, blocking Simmons's view into the house. What kind of offer? The mayor is prepared to personally cover the cost of your sister's treatment. Simmons's voice was smooth as polished marble. The full course of immunotherapy at a specialized facility in the capital. Transportation included. Marcus tensed, listening from the hallway. It was a generous offer. Exactly what they'd been fighting for. Too generous. Why would he do this? Elena asked, suspicion evident in her tone. Mayor Holloway is deeply concerned about the welfare of all Riverside citizens. When he learned about the irregularities in your sister's case, he wanted to make it right. Irregularities, Elena's voice hardened. You mean the discrimination that Mr. Wells exposed in court? The unsubstantiated allegations made by a proven fraud? Simmons corrected gently, but the mayor doesn't want your sister to suffer. While these matters are sorted out, this offer comes with no strings attached except? The mayor would appreciate your disassociation from Mr. Wells and his baseless accusations. A simple statement that you no longer support his claims would suffice. Marcus stepped into view. So that's the game. By their silence, Simmons's expression cooled. Mr. Wells, I didn't realize you were here. Clearly, Marcus approached, standing beside Elena. Let me guess. This generous offer also requires Elena to sign something? A non-disclosure agreement, perhaps, something that prevents her from discussing the hospital's treatment policies or the mayor's pharmaceutical connections? There would be standard confidentiality provisions, yes. Simmons's smile didn't reach his eyes. Standard practice in medical settlements. And if she doesn't sign, Marcus pressed. What happens to Maria then? Her care would continue according to hospital protocols. Simmons's tone made it clear what that meant. Continued denial of the treatment she desperately needed. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. You're saying you'll let my sister die unless I help cover up what's happening. I'm saying the mayor is offering a solution that benefits everyone. Simmons reached into his briefcase, producing a folder. The paperwork is straightforward. Signed today, and Maria's transfer to the specialized facility happens tomorrow. Marcus watched Elena's face, seeing the conflict there, the desperate need to save her sister warring with the knowledge that accepting this deal meant allowing Holloway's corruption to continue unchecked. May I have some time to think about it? Elena asked finally. Of course, the mayor understands this is a significant decision. Simmons handed her the folder. But I should mention that Maria's condition is deteriorating. Dr. Chen estimates she has perhaps a week before the treatment may no longer be effective. I'll need your answer by tomorrow afternoon. After Simmons left, Elena sank into a kitchen chair, the folder unopened before her. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Maria needs this treatment. Sophia needs her aunt. But if I sign this, Holloway hurts more families like yours. Marcus finished. I know. What would you do? Elena looked up at him, eyes searching. His face. If it was your mother? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. I'd do anything to save her. Anything. He sat heavily across from Elena. But this isn't just about Maria anymore. What we've uncovered, the discrimination, the kickbacks, the land deals, it affects hundreds of people. Miguel, who had remained silent during Simmons's visit, finally spoke. If we take the deal, we save Tia Maria but abandon everyone else. If we refuse, we might help others, but he couldn't finish the sentence. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Marcus stared at the folder, thinking through their options. The evidence they'd gathered was compelling but not conclusive. Even with Vince's help, building a legal case would take time. Time Maria didn't have. Let me see the agreement, he said finally. Elena pushed the folder toward him. Inside was a settlement offer more comprehensive than Marcus had anticipated. Not only would Holloway cover Maria's treatment, but he was offering a substantial, compassionate payment to the family, effectively buying their silence at a premium. This is a confession, Marcus said slowly. He's terrified of what we know. But, is it enough? Elena asked. Can we prove what he's doing in time to help Maria? Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. Dr. Chen's name flashed on the screen. Marcus. Her voice was tight with urgency. Maria's taken a turn for the worse. Her kidney function is declining rapidly. If she doesn't get the treatment within days, not weeks. After hanging up, Marcus relayed the news. Elena's face crumpled. I have to take the deal, she said, tears welling. I can't let her die when there's a way to save her. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. After everything you've risked, don't apologize. Marcus's voice was firm. Family comes first, always. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The choice Elena faced kept him pacing his apartment, mind racing between alternatives. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He called Elena early. Don't sign anything yet, I have an idea. 2 hours later, they sat together at Vince's small house on the outskirts of town. The retired paralegal listened attentively as Marcus outlined his plan. It's risky, Vince said when Marcus finished. If it fails, Elena loses the settlement offer and Maria loses her chance at treatment. But if it works, Marcus countered, Maria gets her treatment and Holloway faces consequences. They both looked at Elena, who sat quietly weighing impossible choices with her sister's life in the balance. What do you think? Marcus asked her gently. Elena took a deep breath. I think it's time to stop playing by their rules. The courthouse was more crowded than during Marcus's first appearance. Word had spread about the confrontation between the fake lawyer and Mayor Holloway, drawing curious onlookers and local reporters. Elena sat in the back row this time, her face a mask of practiced indifference. All rise. Judge Patterson entered, his expression giving nothing away as he surveyed the packed courtroom. Be seated. This hearing will address 2 matters. The contempt charge against Marcus Wells for practicing law without a license, and the emergency injunction request regarding Maria Rodriguez's medical treatment. Marcus stood alone at the plaintiff's table, no longer pretending to be what he wasn't. Across the aisle, Simmons radiated smug confidence. "Your Honor," Simmons began, "given Mr. Wells's admitted fraud, we move to dismiss the injunction request entirely. The hospital should not be subjected to judicial scrutiny based on fraudulent representations." Judge Patterson nodded. "Mr. Wells, do you have a response?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus stepped forward. "I acknowledge my deception and accept whatever punishment the court deems appropriate, but the facts of Maria Rodriguez's case stand independent of my credentials." "An interesting perspective from a proven liar," Simmons interjected. "That's enough, counsel," Judge Patterson warned. "Mr. Wells, while I appreciate your contrition, Mr. Simmons's point is valid. Your fraudulent representation taints these proceedings." "Then I withdraw as the representative in this case," Marcus said, "and request the court consider new representation for Ms. Rodriguez." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the door at the back opened. A woman in a crisp navy suit walked confidently down the center aisle. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her expression coolly determined. "Your Honor," she said, approaching the bench. "Rachel Williams requesting permission to represent Elena Rodriguez in this matter." Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Williams, this is unexpected. My apologies for the dramatic entrance." "Your Honor, but I was only retained yesterday." She handed the clerk her credentials. "I'm properly licensed in this state and prepared to proceed with the injunction request." Simmons rose quickly. "Your Honor, this is clearly a coordinated attempt to circumvent the court's authority. Ms. Williams's sudden appearance is entirely proper," Judge Patterson interrupted. "Mr. Wells has withdrawn, and Ms. Rodriguez has retained new counsel. The court will hear the injunction request with Ms. Williams representing the plaintiff." Marcus quietly moved to the spectator section as Rachel took his place at the table. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the plan they'd set in motion. Rachel Williams hadn't been easy to convince. A former classmate from Marcus's brief college career, she'd gone on to become exactly what he had pretended to be, a skilled attorney with a reputation for taking on powerful interests. It had taken all of Marcus's persuasive abilities, plus the compelling evidence they'd gathered, to bring her to Riverside. "Your Honor," Rachel began, "we renew the request for an emergency injunction requiring Riverside General Hospital to provide Maria Rodriguez with the immunotherapy treatment recommended by her physician, Dr. Sarah Chen." "On what grounds, Counselor?" Judge Patterson asked. "Discrimination under Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, violation of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, and breach of fiduciary duty by the hospital board." Rachel's voice was clear and authoritative. "We have evidence that treatment decisions at Riverside General are being influenced by factors other than medical necessity, specifically the financial interests of Mayor Richard Holloway." Simmons scoffed. "These are the same baseless allegations Mr. Wells made." "Except I can prove them," Rachel countered, producing a folder of documents. "These records show a pattern of discriminatory treatment denials affecting primarily Hispanic patients from the east side of Riverside." As Rachel presented the evidence, the same evidence Marcus had gathered with Vince and Elena, Simmons's confidence visibly eroded. When she introduced documentation of Holloway's financial ties to Medcor Pharmaceuticals, he began objecting more frantically. "Your Honor, these documents were clearly obtained improperly. The mayor's private business dealings are matters of public record when they create conflicts of interest in his official duties." Rachel finished smoothly. "Everything I've presented was obtained through legal channels. Public records, FOIA, requests and testimony from hospital staff." Judge Patterson reviewed the evidence carefully. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Williams. Do you have anyone who can testify to the connection between these financial arrangements and specific treatment decisions?" "Yes, Your Honor." Rachel gestured to the back of the courtroom where Diane Winters stood. "Ms. Winters has worked in hospital administration for 30 years and has direct knowledge of how treatment approvals are influenced by non-medical factors." Simmons rose again. "Your Honor, this is clearly orchestrated by Wells. This witness has worked at Riverside General since before you passed the bar, Mr. Simmons," Judge Patterson said dryly. "The court will hear her testimony." As Diane testified about the systematic discrimination in treatment approvals and the pressure from Holloway-appointed board members, Marcus watched the faces in the courtroom. Shock, anger, and disgust rippled through the spectators. But it was the next witness who delivered the most damaging testimony. "The court calls Dr. Sarah Chen," the clerk announced. Dr. Chen took the stand, visibly nervous but determined. Under Rachel's questioning, she detailed how Maria's treatment had been repeatedly denied despite clear medical necessity, how similar treatments were routinely approved for patients from wealthier neighborhoods, and how board members had pressured her to prescribe Medcore medications instead of more effective alternatives. And in your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, Rachel asked, what will happen if Maria Rodriguez does not receive this treatment immediately? She will die, Dr. Chen said simply, within days, not weeks. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Rachel turned to face Judge Patterson. Your Honor, a woman's life hangs in the balance while powerful men play games with hospital policy for financial gain. We ask the court to end this injustice today. Before Judge Patterson could respond, the courtroom doors burst open. Mayor Holloway strode in, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, he announced without preamble, I need to address these slanderous accusations. Mayor Holloway, Judge Patterson said coldly, you are out of order. Take a seat or leave my courtroom. This is a conspiracy to undermine my administration, Holloway continued, ignoring the warning. Wells is a criminal. These witnesses are coerced. The evidence is fabricated. Bailiff, Judge Patterson's voice cut like steel. Remove the mayor if he speaks again without permission. Holloway fell silent, taking a seat beside Simmons, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Patterson considered the evidence before him, then looked up with a decision in his eyes. The court finds sufficient evidence to grant the emergency injunction. Riverside General Hospital is hereby ordered to provide Maria Rodriguez with the full course of immunotherapy, as recommended by Dr. Chen, beginning immediately. A small cheer erupted from Elena, quickly stifled. Furthermore, Judge Patterson continued, given the evidence presented today regarding potential conflicts of interest and discriminatory practices, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation. Holloway's face darkened as Judge Patterson turned his attention to Marcus. As for you, Mr. Wells, your contempt hearing will proceed next week. Until then, you remain released on your own recognizance. But know this, while your methods were inexcusable, your actions today may have saved a life. The court will remember that. As the session adjourned, Marcus felt a curious lightness. He'd lost his false identity and faced potential criminal charges, but for the first time in years, he'd done something unequivocally good. Elena rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. They're going to treat her. Maria's going to get the treatment. Over her shoulder, Marcus saw Holloway watching him with cold fury. The mayor leaned toward one of his aides, whispering instructions that Marcus couldn't hear but could easily imagine. This victory had come at a cost, and Holloway wasn't a man who forgave those who crossed him. The real battle was just beginning. You look like hell, Rachel Williams said, sliding into the booth across from Marcus at the Riverside Diner. Good to see you too, Marcus replied, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. Thanks for what you did in court yesterday. Rachel sipped the coffee, studying him over the rim. 8 years since Boston University, and this is how we reconnect? You impersonating a lawyer and dragging me into a fight with a corrupt small-town mayor? When you put it that way, it sounds bad. It is bad, Marcus. Her tone softened slightly, but also strangely on brand for you, always finding the most complicated way to do the right thing. The waitress arrived with their breakfast order. Eggs and toast for Rachel, nothing for Marcus. His appetite had vanished since Holloway's men had followed him home from the courthouse, making no attempt to hide their surveillance. How's Maria? He asked, responding well to the first treatment. Dr. Chen is cautiously optimistic. Rachel cut into her eggs. But that's not why you asked me here at 7 a.m. No. Marcus leaned forward. The injunction was just the beginning. Holloway's pharmaceutical connections, the hospital discrimination, the land deals. It's all part of a bigger picture. We need to keep pushing. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Marcus, I came here as a favor to help save a woman's life. I've got cases waiting for me back in Chicago. People are dying because of Holloway's policies, Marcus insisted. Not just Maria. Dozens of patients who can't get proper care because of profit-driven decisions. And then there's the environmental angle we've just started uncovering. Environmental angle? Marcus lowered his voice. Miguel found records suggesting Holloway's development company dumped industrial waste on land that later became the hospital's East Wing expansion. The soil samples show contamination that could be causing unusual illness clusters in hospital workers. Rachel's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That's a serious allegation, with evidence to back it up. Marcus slid a flash drive across the table. Everything we've gathered is on here. Financial records, property transactions, health department complaints that were mysteriously dropped. Rachel pocketed the drive. Assuming this is legitimate, what exactly are you asking me to do? Be the lawyer I pretended to be, Marcus said simply. Take this case officially. Build on what we've started. I'll work behind the scenes, but you'll be the public face. And what happens to you? The contempt charges aren't going away. Marcus shrugged. I'll deal with that. It's not my first run-in with the law. That's not reassuring. Rachel studied him. Why are you doing this, Marcus? Really? This isn't your typical con. The question caught him off guard. Why was he still fighting when the smart play was to skip town? Maria was getting treatment. His original goal was accomplished. I'm tired of running, he said finally. Tired of being someone new every few months. Maybe I want to fix something. For once, instead of just taking what I need and disappearing. Rachel's expression softened. I remember when we first met. Freshman philosophy class. You were so passionate about justice then. Before my mother got sick, before I dropped out, before I became this. Marcus gestured vaguely at himself. Maybe it's not too late to be that person again. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. I can't promise anything. I need to review all this evidence, see if there's really a case here beyond the immediate issue with Maria. That's all I'm asking. After breakfast, they walked toward the hospital where Rachel planned to check on Maria's progress. The morning was crisp, fall leaves crunching under their feet. Tell me about our history, Rachel said suddenly. What? If I'm staying in town, people will ask how we know each other. Better to get our story straight. We tell the truth, Marcus said. We were classmates at BU. You went on to law school. I took a different path. And the part where we dated for 6 months? Rachel asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. That, too. Marcus smiled slightly, though maybe we leave out how it ended. You mean the part where you disappeared without a word when your mother's condition worsened? Or the part where I found out months later that you'd dropped out entirely? The old pain in her voice made Marcus wince. I never got to explain. There was nothing to explain. You shut down, Marcus. You shut everyone out, including me. They walked in silence for a block, the weight of their shared past hanging between them. I couldn't handle it, Marcus said finally, watching her die, slowly while drowning in medical bills and bureaucratic nonsense. It was easier to focus entirely on her, to cut everything else away. I would have helped. Rachel's voice was quiet. I tried to. I know, but accepting help felt like admitting I couldn't save her myself. Marcus shook his head. I was young and stupid. And now, just stupid, he said with a self-deprecating smile, but trying to be better. As they approached the hospital, Rachel stopped. I'll review the evidence tonight. If it's as compelling as you say, I'll consider taking this on officially. But Marcus, her expression turned serious. If I do this, we do it my way. Legal. Ethical. No shortcuts. No cons. Understood. And you need to be prepared for the fallout. Holloway will come after you hard when he realizes you're still involved. I know. Rachel studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision. Marcus watched her walk into the hospital, feeling a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. Rachel Williams was exactly the ally they needed. Brilliant, principled, and fearless, but working with her meant confronting not just Holloway, but his own past mistakes and the person he'd become. His phone buzzed with a text from Vince. News van outside courthouse. Holloway called press conference for noon. Something big happening. Marcus texted back. On my way. Whatever Holloway was planning, it wouldn't be good. The mayor had been publicly humiliated in court and was undoubtedly looking for revenge. Marcus needed to be there to see exactly what form that revenge would take. As he turned toward the courthouse, he caught sight of a familiar black sedan trailing him at a distance. Holloway's men were still watching, still waiting for him to make a mistake. Marcus straightened his shoulders and kept walking. For the first time in years, he wasn't running away from a fight. He was walking straight into one. The courthouse steps teemed with reporters and curious locals as Mayor Holloway approached the hastily assembled podium. Marcus hung back at the edge of the crowd, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, watching. Citizens of Riverside, Holloway began, his voice carrying the practiced conviction of a career politician. I stand before you today to address the baseless accusations that have been made against me and my administration. The mayor looked immaculate in a tailored navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile confident. Nothing in his demeanor suggested a man under investigation. A convicted con artist named Marcus Wells came to our town, pretending to be a lawyer. He manipulated a vulnerable family, stirred up false claims of discrimination at our hospital, and attempted to smear my reputation with fabricated connections to hospital vendors. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus tensed, resisting the urge to object. He wasn't convicted. Not yet, anyway. This morning, I received confirmation that Wells has a criminal record in 3 states for similar scams. Holloway held up a folder: identity theft, fraud, and misrepresentation. A career criminal who preys on the vulnerable. The accusations stung, not because they were entirely false, but because they strategically omitted the context and motives behind Marcus's actions. I've directed the district attorney to pursue maximum charges against this individual, Holloway continued, and I want to assure the citizens of Riverside that our hospital provides equal care to all patients, regardless of background. The Rodriguez case was always being handled appropriately, despite Wells's theatrical claims. As Holloway fielded softball questions from friendly local reporters, Marcus slipped away, stomach churning. The mayor was effectively poisoning the well, ensuring that anything Marcus said going forward would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a known criminal. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Need to see you. Big discovery. Library. Now. 20 minutes later, Marcus found Miguel in the library's computer lab, hunched over a terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. Look at this, the teenager said without preamble, pointing at the screen. Property records for the land where the hospital's east wing was built. Marcus leaned closer. What am I looking for? These parcels were purchased by Holloway's shell company 5 years ago, before he became mayor. But check the previous owner. Miguel highlighted a name. Riverside Chemical Storage. Marcus read aloud. And RCS was shut down by the EPA in 2010 for improper handling of industrial waste. Their facility was supposed to undergo extensive environmental remediation before the land could be used for anything else, especially a hospital. Miguel opened another window showing EPA reports. But look, the remediation was marked complete after only 3 months, when experts estimated it would take at least 2 years to properly clean the site. Who signed off on the completion? Marcus asked, already suspecting the answer. James Simmons, who was then working for the state environmental office. Miguel looked up. The same Simmons who's now the hospital's lawyer. The land was never properly cleaned, Marcus realized. Holloway bought it cheap because it was contaminated, bribed officials to falsify the remediation records, then flipped it to the hospital at a massive profit once he became mayor and could influence the board. Exactly. Miguel opened another document. And here's where it gets worse. The East Wing, built on that contaminated land, houses the children's ward and maternity unit. Marcus felt sick. Are you saying... I'm saying the unusual illness clusters Dr. Chen has been documenting could be directly linked to environmental toxins still present in the soil and groundwater. Miguel's voice shook slightly. Including rare autoimmune conditions like the one affecting my aunt. The implications were staggering. Not just corruption and profiteering, but deliberate endangerment of vulnerable patients, including children and pregnant women. We need to verify this, Marcus said, mind racing. Soil samples, independent testing, already happening. Miguel smiled grimly. Dr. Chen has been suspicious for months. She's been quietly collecting samples and sending them to a lab in the capital. Results should be back tomorrow. Does Holloway know about this? I don't think so. Dr. Chen has been careful, and the hospital administrators don't pay much attention to the research projects of junior doctors. Marcus squeezed Miguel's shoulder. This is incredible work. You should be the lawyer in the family. Not me. I'm thinking data science, actually, Miguel said with a shy smile. Or investigative journalism. Either way, Holloway wouldn't stand a chance. As they gathered their materials, Marcus's phone rang. Rachel, I've reviewed the evidence, she said without preamble. It's solid, I'm in. Perfect timing, Marcus replied. Miguel just uncovered something even bigger. Can you meet us at Vince's place in an hour? Make it 2. I'm still at the hospital with Elena and Maria. How is she? Improving. The treatment is working. Rachel's voice softened. Elena asked about you. I think she feels guilty for doubting you. Tell her not to. I've given people plenty of reasons to doubt me over the years. After hanging up, Marcus and Miguel headed toward the library exit, deep in discussion about their next steps. Neither noticed the man watching them from between the bookshelves. Phone pressed to his ear. They know about the land deal, he said quietly. The doctor's been testing soil samples. Results expected tomorrow. Outside, the air felt charged with possibilities. For the first time, they had concrete evidence that could not only expose Holloway's corruption, but potentially bring criminal charges. Environmental contamination, falsified federal documents, deliberate endangerment, these were serious offenses that even Holloway's connections couldn't easily brush aside. As they walked toward Vince's house, Marcus felt someone watching. He turned to see a black SUV idling at the curb, the driver making no attempt to hide his surveillance. "Don't look," Marcus murmured to Miguel. "But we're being followed. Holloway's guys? Probably." Marcus guided them onto a busier street. "They've been trailing me since the court hearing. Just stay calm and keep walking." At the next intersection, a second SUV appeared, blocking their path forward. The first vehicle accelerated, closing in from behind. "Change of plans," Marcus said, his voice tight. "When I say run, head down that alley and don't stop until you reach Vince's. I'll meet you there." "What are you going to do?" "Create a diversion." Marcus slipped Miguel the flash drive containing their evidence. "Keep this safe." As the SUVs drew closer, Marcus spotted an opening. A delivery truck unloading at a nearby store, its back doors open. "Now!" Marcus pushed Miguel toward the alley, then sprinted toward the truck, vaulting into its cargo area and out the other side as the SUVs screeched to a halt. What followed was a desperate chase through back streets and service alleys. Marcus, drawing the pursuit away from Miguel, using every trick he'd learned in years of staying one step ahead of consequences. Finally, after doubling back through a department store and exiting through a service entrance, he lost his pursuers. Breathing hard, he made his way to Vince's house by a circuitous route. Miguel had arrived safely, already explaining their discoveries. To the retired paralegal, "Holloway's getting desperate," Vince observed as Marcus recounted the pursuit. "These aren't the actions of a man who feels secure in his position. He knows we're close to exposing him," Marcus agreed. "The question is, what will he do next?" The answer came sooner than expected. As Rachel arrived with Elena, her expression was grim. "Dr. Chen just called," she said. "The hospital administration put her on immediate administrative leave this afternoon. No explanation, no warning. They've restricted her access to all patient records, including Maria's. They're cutting off our medical expert," Marcus realized, "and potentially interfering with Maria's treatment," Elena added, her voice tight with worry. "The new doctor they assigned doesn't seem to understand her condition." "It's starting," Vince said quietly. "Holloway's counterattack, and this is just the beginning." Judge Patterson's courtroom was standing room only. News of the confrontation between Mayor Holloway and the fake lawyer had spread beyond Riverside, attracting reporters from larger cities and curious spectators eager to witness the drama. Marcus sat beside Rachel at the plaintiff's table, uncomfortably aware of the stares and whispers directed his way. Across the aisle, Simmons had been joined by 2 additional attorneys, signaling the hospital's escalating response to the threat. "Nervous?" Rachel asked quietly. "Terrified," Marcus admitted, "but ready." In the gallery, Elena sat with Maria, who had insisted on attending despite her weakened condition. Miguel flanked his aunt protectively, while Vince and Diane Winters sat directly behind Marcus, a show of solidarity that touched him deeply. "All rise." Judge Patterson entered, his expression grave as he surveyed the packed courtroom. "Be seated. This hearing will address the expanded injunction request regarding Riverside General Hospital's treatment policies, as well as new evidence pertaining to environmental safety concerns at the facility." The judge turned to Rachel. "Ms. Williams, you may proceed." Rachel rose, composed and professional. "Your Honor, we've submitted amended filings detailing a pattern of discriminatory treatment at Riverside General Hospital that goes far beyond Maria Rodriguez's case. We've identified 17 similar cases where East Side residents, predominantly Hispanic, were denied treatments routinely approved for patients from other neighborhoods." She methodically presented their evidence: statistical analyses, internal, hospital communications, testimony from former patients. With each exhibit, Simmons objected more strenuously, only to be overruled by Judge Patterson. "Furthermore," Rachel continued, "we've uncovered disturbing evidence regarding the land on which the hospital's East Wing was constructed." A murmur ran through the courtroom as Rachel detailed Miguel's discoveries about the contaminated land, the falsified remediation reports, and the suspicious illness clusters among patients and staff in the East Wing. "We call Dr. Sarah Chen to testify regarding these medical anomalies," Rachel said. Dr. Chen took the stand, her testimony precise and devastating. Using anonymized patient data, she demonstrated the higher incidence of certain conditions in the East Wing compared to other hospital areas, particularly among long-term patients and staff. "And in your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, what might explain these statistical anomalies?" Rachel asked. Environmental contamination would be consistent with the symptom patterns we're observing, Dr. Chen replied, particularly the specific autoimmune responses and elevated cancer rates. Simmons rose for cross-examination, his tone condescending. Dr. Chen, isn't it true that you were recently placed on administrative leave for unprofessional conduct? I was placed on leave without explanation the day after I testified in support of Maria Rodriguez, Dr. Chen replied calmly. After 8 years of exemplary performance reviews, and these so-called soil samples you've been collecting, did you have authorization from hospital administration? I had approval for a general environmental health study, yes. The specific soil testing was within the scope of that approved research. As Simmons continued attempting to discredit Dr. Chen, the courtroom doors opened. A woman in a lab coat entered, approaching Rachel with an envelope. After a brief whispered conversation, Rachel turned to the judge. Your Honor, we've just received the lab results from the environmental testing Dr. Chen initiated. We request permission to enter this as Exhibit 27. Judge Patterson nodded. Proceed. The lab results confirmed their worst fears. Significant levels of industrial chemicals remained in the soil beneath the east wing, including compounds known to cause immune system dysfunction and increased cancer risk. In light of this evidence, Rachel concluded, we request an immediate injunction requiring the hospital to relocate patients from the affected areas, conduct comprehensive environmental testing throughout the facility, and establish a medical monitoring program for all patients and staff potentially exposed to these contaminants. As she returned to her seat, the courtroom doors opened again. Mayor Holloway strode in, flanked by his chief of staff and a distinguished-looking older man Marcus didn't recognize. Your Honor, Simmons said quickly, the defense calls Mayor Richard Holloway to address these unfounded allegations. Holloway took the stand with practiced confidence, projecting calm authority as he was sworn in. Mayor Holloway, Simmons began, what can you tell us about the land purchase for the hospital expansion? My development company acquired that property through normal channels. Holloway testified smoothly. All environmental requirements were met, all inspections passed. These insinuations about contamination are simply attempts to create panic and undermine public trust in our healthcare system. And your relationship with Medcore Pharmaceuticals? Purely professional. As mayor, I meet with many business leaders looking to invest in our community. I have no financial interest in Medcore or any other pharmaceutical company. Rachel rose for cross-examination, her expression calm but determined. Mayor Holloway, isn't it true that before becoming mayor, you owned significant shares in Trinity Holdings, which later acquired Medcore? Holloway's smile faltered slightly. I've had many investments over the years. I can't recall every detail. Perhaps this will refresh your memory, Rachel said, presenting a document. This SEC filing shows you received stock options in Trinity, valued at over $3 million as part of their acquisition of Medcore. Options you still hold while making decisions that directly benefit that company. For the first time, Holloway looked unsettled. These are complex financial matters that my advisors handle. I'm not directly involved in investment decisions. Really? Rachel produced another document. Then why does this email from you to Trinity's CEO specifically discuss leveraging my position to expand market share in Riverside Healthcare? A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. Rachel continued methodically dismantling Holloway's denials, exposing contradictions between his testimony and the documentary evidence. When she turned to the contaminated land issue, the mayor's composure cracked further. Are you aware, Mayor Holloway, that falsifying federal environmental remediation documents is a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison? Objection, Simmons shouted. Counsel is badgering the witness and making inflammatory accusations. Sustained, Judge Patterson said. Ms. Williams, confine your questions to established facts. Rachel nodded. Mayor Holloway, did you personally review the environmental remediation reports for the hospital expansion land? I may have. We handle many properties. Did you find it unusual that remediation estimated to take 2 years was somehow completed in 3 months? I'm not an environmental expert. I relied on the appropriate authorities. Authorities like James Simmons, who signed off on the remediation while working for the State Environmental Office, and who now serves as your administration's legal counsel. Holloway's face flushed. This is a witch hunt. These accusations are politically motivated attempts to undermine my administration's achievements. As the cross-examination continued, Marcus watched the mayor's carefully constructed facade crumble. The confident politician was giving way to a defensive, occasionally contradictory witness whose explanations grew increasingly implausible. When Rachel finished, Judge Patterson called a brief recess. In the hallway, Marcus pulled Rachel aside. "You're destroying him in there," he said admiringly. "It's not enough," Rachel replied, frustration evident in her voice. "We've damaged his credibility, but we still don't have the smoking gun that proves he knowingly endangered patients. Maybe we don't need it." Marcus nodded toward the courtroom doors, where reporters were clustered. Public opinion is already turning against him. The state attorney general's office is watching. Sometimes the threat of exposure is enough. For a conman, you can be surprisingly naive about politics, Rachel said dryly. Holloway won't go down without a fight, and he still has powerful friends. As they returned to the courtroom, Judge Patterson called for the next witness. A surprise addition from the defense. The court calls Dr. Robert Langford, Chief Medical Officer of Riverside General Hospital, Simmons announced. An elderly gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses and a grave demeanor took the stand. As he was sworn in, Marcus noticed how the hospital staff in attendance sat up straighter, their respect for the doctor evident. "Dr. Langford," Simmons began, "you've reviewed Dr. Chen's data regarding illness clusters in the East Wing. What is your professional assessment?" While Dr. Chen's statistical analysis shows some concerning patterns, her conclusions are premature, Dr. Langford stated. Many factors besides environmental contamination could explain these variations. Patient demographics, pre-existing conditions, even statistical anomalies in a relatively small sample size. Simmons smiled. "And the soil test results presented today? Concerning, certainly, but not conclusive regarding patient impacts. More comprehensive testing would be needed before taking drastic measures like relocating patients." "Thank you, Doctor." No further questions. Rachel approached for cross-examination, her expression respectful but determined. "Dr. Langford, how long have you worked at Riverside General?" 37 years. "I became Chief Medical Officer 15 years ago." "A distinguished career," Rachel acknowledged. "During those 15 years as CMO, how many times have you overruled a treating physician's recommended course of treatment, Doctor?" Langford hesitated. "I couldn't say precisely. It happens occasionally when broader considerations must be taken into account. Would it surprise you to learn that according to hospital records, you've overruled treating physicians' recommendations 127 times in the past 5 years, and that 89 of those cases involved patients from East Side neighborhoods?" The doctor's expression tightened. "Hospital policies require certain approvals for treatments exceeding standard cost parameters. Policies implemented under Mayor Holloway's appointed hospital board," Rachel noted. "Dr. Langford, when did you first become aware of potential environmental concerns in the East Wing?" After a long pause, Dr. Langford answered quietly, "Approximately 18 months ago." A hush fell over the courtroom. "And what actions did you take upon learning of these concerns?" "I requested additional testing, but the board considered it an unnecessary expense." "Did you inform patients or staff about these potential risks?" "I was advised against creating undue alarm without conclusive evidence." "Advised by whom?" Dr. Langford's gaze flickered toward Mayor Holloway. "By hospital legal counsel, in consultation with the mayor's office." The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Rachel returned to her seat, having extracted the very confession they needed. Knowledge, deliberate inaction, and a direct link to Holloway. Judge Patterson's ruling came swiftly and decisively. He granted the expanded injunction, ordering immediate relocation of patients from the East Wing, comprehensive environmental testing, and establishment of a medical monitoring program. Furthermore, he referred the matter to both the State Attorney General and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency for criminal investigation. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement, Marcus caught Elena's eye across the room. She was crying, her arms around Maria, who looked stunned but relieved. For them, justice was finally being served, but the battle was far from over. As Holloway stormed out of the courtroom, his face contorted with rage, Marcus knew the mayor would not surrender his power without a desperate fight. Marcus woke to the sound of shattering glass. He bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, as footsteps crunched across the broken window of his apartment. A brick lay on his floor, wrapped in paper secured with a rubber band. Marcus grabbed his phone, backing toward the door as he dialed 911. Before he could press call, a voice came from the street below. "That's just a reminder, Wells," a man shouted. "Next time won't be a warning." Tires screeched as a vehicle sped away. Marcus rushed to the window in time to see a black SUV disappearing around the corner. the same model that had been following him for days. With shaking hands, he unwrapped the paper from the brick. The message was simple: drop it or else. The next morning, Marcus found Rachel, Elena, and Vince waiting at the diner, concern evident on their faces. "You look terrible," Rachel said as he slid into the booth. "Rough night." Marcus showed them the brick and note. "Seems Holloway's getting desperate." Elena's face paled. First Dr. Chen being suspended. Now this. He's escalating. It gets worse. Vince said quietly. "Someone broke into my house last night while I was asleep. They took my laptop and all my files related to the case." Rachel frowned. "Did you call the police?" "Of course. They took a report, but..." Vince shrugged. "The chief is Holloway's brother-in-law. We need to be careful." Marcus warned. "All of us. Holloway's not just trying to intimidate us, he's trying to eliminate evidence." "We should move Maria to another hospital," Elena said, fear evident in her voice. "Somewhere outside Riverside. That might be wise." Rachel agreed. "I can arrange a transfer to a facility in the capital." As they discussed security measures, Marcus's phone rang, an unknown number. "Mr. Wells." Mayor Holloway's voice was calm and businesslike. "I think it's time we spoke directly." Marcus put the phone on speaker. "I'm listening." "This situation has gotten out of hand," Holloway said. "People are being hurt unnecessarily. I'm prepared to offer a solution that benefits everyone involved." "What kind of solution?" Marcus asked cautiously. "Full treatment for Maria Rodriguez at a specialist facility of her family's choosing. A generous settlement for her pain and suffering, and a commitment to investigate the environmental concerns at the hospital with full transparency. And in return, you and your associates drop all other allegations and cease your investigation into my administration." Holloway paused. "Additionally, I'll speak to Judge Patterson about leniency regarding your contempt charges." The offer was tempting. Everything they'd initially fought for, plus guarantees of Maria's care and Marcus's potential freedom. The others watched him, waiting for his response. "Why should we trust you?" Marcus asked finally. "Your men threw a brick through my window last night. They broke into Vince's house. I assure you, if anyone associated with me engaged in such behavior, it was without my knowledge or approval." Holloway's voice remained smooth. "Emotions are running high on all sides. Let's de-escalate before something truly regrettable happens." The implied threat hung in the air. "We'll consider your offer," Marcus said carefully. "I'll need to discuss it with the others." "Of course. I'll expect your answer by tomorrow morning." The line went dead. "He's scared," Rachel observed. "The state attorney general's investigation must be getting uncomfortable, or he's buying time while he destroys evidence," Vince added. Elena looked torn. If Maria could get treatment somewhere safe, away from Holloway's influence, that's exactly what he's counting on, Marcus said. "Divide and conquer. Give the Rodriguez family what they want while burying the larger issue." "What larger issue?" Elena's voice sharpened. "My sister's life was all I cared about when this started." "I know," Marcus said gently, "and we've secured that. But now we know dozens of other patients have been endangered by Holloway's corruption. Do we abandon them?" Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. Her face went pale. "It's Miguel. Someone spray-painted threats on our house. Sophia's terrified." "This ends now," Marcus said, standing abruptly. Holloway crossed a line. "Where are you going?" Rachel grabbed his arm. "To end this before anyone else gets hurt." Marcus pulled away. "Take Elena home. Make sure her family is safe." Outside, Marcus hailed a taxi to take him to the one place in Riverside he hadn't yet visited. Mayor Holloway's home. The elegant colonial mansion sat on 3 manicured acres in the town's wealthiest neighborhood, a physical manifestation of the mayor's power and prosperity. The security guard at the gate seemed surprised when Marcus gave his name. But a quick call to the house resulted in grudging permission to enter. Holloway was waiting on the front steps, dressed casually in weekend attire that somehow still projected authority. "Bold move coming here," the mayor observed as Marcus approached. "I assumed you'd want neutral ground." "I'm done playing games," Marcus said. "The intimidation stops now, tonight, or I go public with everything, not just the hospital and the land deals, but the offshore accounts, the kickbacks from contractors, all of it." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "I don't respond well to threats, Mr. Wells. Neither do children," Marcus countered. "Sophia Rodriguez is 7 years old. Your thugs terrified her today." Something flickered in Holloway's expression. Surprise, possibly, even genuine concern. "I didn't authorize that." "Maybe not specifically." But you've created a culture where your people think intimidating families and threatening children is acceptable. Marcus stepped closer. It stops now, or I burn everything down. Your reputation, your freedom, your legacy. I've got nothing to lose. You've got everything. Holloway studied him for a long moment, seeming to reassess the man before him. You're not what I expected, Wells. For a con man, you show surprising principles. I'm full of surprises. Clearly, Holloway gestured toward the house. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, more privately. I don't think so. Marcus took a step back. My terms are simple. Call off your dogs. Leave the Rodriguez family alone. Stop interfering with Dr. Chen and the hospital staff who are cooperating with investigators. In return, I'll make sure your cooperation is noted. When the state attorney general files charges, you assume charges are inevitable. We both know they are. The only question is how many and how severe. As they stood in tense silence, a car pulled into the driveway. A police cruiser. Chief Thomas Holloway, the mayor's brother-in-law, emerged with a grim expression. This him? The chief asked, approaching Marcus. It's fine, Tom, the mayor said. Mr. Wells was just leaving. Actually, the chief continued, I'm here on official business. He turned to Marcus. Marcus Wells, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and criminal impersonation. What? Marcus backed away. Those charges were pending a hearing. Next week. New evidence accelerated the timeline, Chief Holloway said, producing handcuffs. The DA filed formal charges this morning. Marcus looked at the mayor, who merely shrugged. The legal system must run its course, I'm sure you understand. As the chief cuffed him, Marcus realized he'd miscalculated badly. He'd assumed Holloway would continue with intimidation tactics. Instead, the mayor had simply accelerated the legitimate legal consequences of Marcus's actions. This doesn't change anything, Marcus said, as he was led to the cruiser. Rachel has all the evidence. The investigation continues with or without me. Perhaps, Mayor Holloway conceded, but without its central witness, a man now facing multiple felony charges, that investigation becomes much less credible. Marcus spent that night in the Riverside County Jail, a stark concrete building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. His cell was bare and cold, with a thin mattress on a metal frame and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The isolation gave him ample time to reflect on his mistakes. He'd been arrogant, thinking he could outmaneuver Holloway on the mayor's home turf. Worse, he'd underestimated how quickly the legal system could move when properly motivated. His contempt charges had been manageable. These new charges carried potential years in prison. Around midnight, a guard appeared. You've got a visitor. In the small visitation room, Vince waited, looking older and more tired than Marcus had ever seen him. Rachel's working on bail, the retired paralegal said without preamble. But the DA's office is fighting it. They're claiming you're a flight risk. They're not wrong, Marcus admitted. How's Elena's family? Shaken, but safe. Rachel moved them to a hotel for now. Vince leaned forward. Marcus, they're trying to make this all about you, your fraud, your criminal history. They want to discredit everything we've uncovered by tying it to your deception. It's working, isn't it? Vince nodded grimly. The local paper's already running with it. Mayor vindicated as fraud arrested. Holloway's giving a press conference tomorrow morning to set the record straight. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of failure. I'm sorry, Vince. I thought I could fix this. You still can. Vince's voice hardened with unexpected determination. But you need to decide who you really are. The con man who runs when things get tough, or the man who finishes what he started, no matter the cost. As the guard signaled the end of visitation, Vince stood to leave. Rachel will be by in the morning with legal options. Think about what I said. Alone again in his cell, Marcus faced the hardest decision of his life. The smart play, the only play really for someone with his background, was to accept a plea deal, serve minimal time, and disappear afterward. Start fresh somewhere new, with a new identity. It was what he'd always done. But something had changed in him since coming to Riverside. The man who'd hung a fake Harvard degree on his office wall wouldn't recognize the man now pacing a jail cell, more concerned with justice for others than his own freedom. For the first time in years, Marcus Wells was considering sacrificing himself for something bigger than survival. Marcus stared at the ceiling of his cell, tracing the hairline cracks in the concrete as morning light gradually filled the small space. Sleep had eluded him, memories of his past crowding his thoughts instead. He remembered the day everything changed. Sitting in a sterile doctor's office as his mother received her second cancer diagnosis. The first bout 3 years earlier had depleted their modest savings. This time, they had nothing left. There are treatment options, the oncologist had explained gently, but your insurance classification limits coverage. There would be significant out-of-pocket expenses. His mother had simply nodded, already calculating, already deciding she wouldn't burden her only child with debt he couldn't repay. Marcus had seen the resignation in her eyes and felt something break inside him. 2 weeks later, he dropped out of Boston University despite being on scholarship. His professors had protested. He was brilliant, they said, with a promising future, but textbooks and theories seemed meaningless in the face of his mother's mortality. He took 3 jobs, working himself to exhaustion while researching alternative treatments, payment options, medical trials, anything that might save her. When conventional avenues failed, he turned to less conventional ones. His first con had been small, impersonating an insurance adjuster to get information about coverage denials. Then came a falsified form that secured an appointment with a specialist, each deception justified by desperation, each small success emboldening him further. But it hadn't been enough. The treatments came too late. The system designed to heal had instead thrown up endless barriers of paperwork, approvals, and cost calculations. Catherine Wells died on a Tuesday morning, her son holding her hand. Marcus was 20 years old, alone in the world, and filled with a rage that had nowhere productive to go. The funeral costs had pushed him over the edge financially. With nothing left to lose, he'd embraced the skills necessity had taught him. If the system was rigged, he'd reasoned, why play by its rules? That first year, he'd moved between identities like trying on clothes, insurance agent, medical biller, pharmaceutical rep, small cons, quick paydays, just enough to survive while nursing his grief and anger. Later, he'd graduated to more elaborate schemes, business consultant, investment advisor, and finally lawyer. Each new identity further removed from the idealistic college student who'd once dreamed of changing the world through legitimate means. Until Riverside. Until Elena Rodriguez walked into his office with a story so painfully familiar it had cracked his carefully constructed cynicism. A key rattled in the cell door, pulling Marcus from his memories. Rachel stood in the doorway, legal briefcase in hand, expression unreadable. "You look worse than yesterday," she observed, setting her briefcase on the small metal table. "Prison chic," Marcus replied with a weak smile. "How's everyone holding up?" "Elena and her family are at a hotel in the next county. Maria's treatment is continuing there." Rachel began organizing documents. "Vince is staying with friends. Dr. Chen has been formally terminated but is cooperating with state investigators. And Holloway, holding a press conference this morning to announce a comprehensive review of hospital practices while painting you as a deranged criminal obsessed with destroying his reputation." Rachel's voice hardened. "The local paper's eating it up. So we're losing the narrative, for now." Rachel looked up. "Which is why I'm here with options." She laid out 3 paths forward. First, a plea deal. Admit to the fraud charges in exchange for minimal jail time, possibly even probation given his assistance with the hospital case. Second, fight the charges and risk a much longer sentence if convicted. Third, turn state's witness against Holloway in exchange for immunity. "The third option is complicated," Rachel explained. "The state prosecutor is interested but needs more than we currently have. Direct evidence of Holloway's knowledge of the contamination and its cover-up, which we don't have," Marcus said. "Not yet." Rachel hesitated. "There's something else. I've been digging into your past, your real past, before the con started." Marcus tensed. "Why?" "Looking for character witnesses. Anything that might help your case." She met his eyes. "I found your college records. You were pre-law at BU. Dean's list. Your professors still remember you." The revelation hung between them, that Marcus had once been on the path to becoming legitimately what he'd later pretended to be. "That was another life," he said quietly. "Was it? Or was it the real you, before grief and anger pulled you off course?" Rachel reached across the table, her hand covering his. "The Marcus Wells I knew in college wanted to fight injustice through the law. That's exactly what you're doing now, just through unorthodox methods." Marcus withdrew his hand. "Save the redemption narrative for the judge. We both know what I am." "Do we?" Rachel challenged. "Because the man I've watched these past weeks fighting for a family he barely knows, risking his freedom to expose corruption, that man looks an awful lot like the idealistic student I used to know." Before Marcus could respond, the door opened. Again. A guard entered with a visitor request form. You've got another visitor, says he's your father. Marcus froze. That's impossible. My father's been gone for 15 years. Well, someone claiming to be Robert Wells is in the visitor room. Want to see him or not? Curiosity overrode caution. I'll see him. In the visitation room, an older man waited. Tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and familiar eyes that widened when Marcus entered. Marcus. The man stood, his voice rough with emotion. You look like her. The resemblance was undeniable. Same jawline, same eyes as the man in the few photographs Marcus's mother had kept. Robert Wells, who had walked away from his family when Marcus was 12, offering occasional child support payments but little else. What are you doing here? Marcus remained standing, maintaining distance. Your friend Rachel found me. Robert gestured for Marcus to sit. She said you were in trouble. I've been in trouble for years. Marcus replied coldly. Why show up now? Because this time it's different. Robert leaned forward. You're all over the news, even made the papers back in Boston. Fake lawyer exposes hospital corruption. People are calling you a whistleblower, a hero. I'm neither. I'm a con man who got caught. Maybe. Robert studied his son. Or maybe you're finally becoming the man your mother always believed you could be. The mention of his mother hit Marcus like a physical blow. Don't talk about her. You lost that right when you left. I know. Robert's voice softened. I failed both of you in ways I can never make right. But I'm here now because I might be able to help. How could you possibly help? Because before I retired, I worked for the EPA, specifically in the division that oversaw toxic waste remediation. Robert produced a business card confirming his former position, including the initial assessment of the Riverside chemical storage site 15 years ago. Marcus stared at the card, mind racing. You knew about the contamination? I conducted the original survey that classified it as a high-priority cleanup site. Robert's expression darkened. When I saw the news about the hospital being built there after supposedly being remediated in just 3 months, I knew something was wrong. That land needed years of treatment before being safe for any use, let alone a medical facility. Do you have documentation? Proof the remediation was inadequate? Better than that. Robert reached into his jacket, removing a small digital recorder. I have the current regional director of the EPA on tape admitting the remediation certification was rushed through as a political favor, and emails showing pressure from Holloway's office to expedite approval. Marcus looked at his father with new eyes. Why would you do this? Why help me now? Robert was quiet for a moment. Because I've watched from a distance as you've destroyed your life trying to fix things that broke when I left. Your mother's illness, your dropped education, your turn to con artistry. All of it traces back to my failures as a father. He pushed the recorder across the table. I can't undo the past, but I can help you now, if you'll let me. Marcus stared at the small device. Potential salvation not just for his legal troubles, but for the entire case against Holloway. The evidence they'd been missing, delivered by the last person he'd ever expected to help him. I don't forgive you, Marcus said finally, taking the recorder. I don't know if I ever can. I understand. Robert nodded. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance to do one right thing for my son. As Robert left, Rachel returned, immediately noticing the recorder in Marcus's hand. What's that? The smoking gun, Marcus replied, his voice steady with new resolve. Call the state prosecutor. Tell them I'm ready to talk. That afternoon, in a conference room rather than a cell, Marcus met with Assistant State Attorney General Lydia Morales. With Rachel beside him, he laid out everything. His impersonation of a lawyer, his discovery of the hospital discrimination, the environmental cover-up, and Holloway's attempts at intimidation. I'm a fraud, he concluded. I won't pretend otherwise. But everything we've uncovered about Mayor Holloway and Riverside General is real. People are being harmed. The evidence is solid. Morales reviewed the recording Robert had provided, her expression growing increasingly grim. This is compelling, she admitted. Combined with the documentation you've already provided, it presents a strong case for criminal negligence, fraud, and possible racketeering charges against Mayor Holloway and several associates. And Marcus? Rachel pressed. Given his cooperation? Morales considered. I can recommend immunity for his testimony regarding the Holloway investigation. The existing fraud charges would remain at the local prosecutor's discretion. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. More importantly, it would ensure the case against Holloway moved forward regardless of Marcus's personal fate. I'll take it, he said. As they finalized details, Marcus felt a curious lightness. For years he'd run from his past, both the idealistic student he'd been and the absent father who had helped shape his path. Today, in this sterile conference room, both versions of his history had converged to create an unexpected future. Whether that future included freedom remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Marcus Wells was facing consequences without planning an escape, and it felt strangely like coming home. The Riverside Gazette's headline was unambiguous. Mayor denies corruption allegations, calls investigation political witch hunt. Beneath it, a photo showed Holloway at his press conference, expression earnest as he defended his administration against what he called baseless accusations from discredited sources. Marcus folded the paper and pushed it across the table to Rachel. They were meeting in a small conference room at the State Attorney General's field office where Marcus had been transferred pending his cooperation agreement. He's controlling the narrative, Marcus observed. The local press is practically his PR team. Local press, yes, Rachel agreed. But this story is growing beyond Riverside. She opened her laptop, showing headlines from larger papers in the E region. State media is picking up on the environmental angle. Hospital built on toxic land? Mayor accused of endangering patients for profit. Still not enough, Marcus said, frustration evident in his voice. Holloway has too much influence with the hospital board. They're already trying to discredit Dr. Chen, claiming her data is flawed. Rachel looked thoughtful. What we need is someone who can cut through the spin. A journalist with credibility and independence. Someone Holloway can't intimidate or control. In a town this size? Good luck. Not from Riverside. Rachel pulled out her phone. From the Capitol. 2 hours later, they were joined by Zoe Parker, an investigative reporter for the State Chronicle known for her uncompromising coverage of political corruption. In her mid-30s with short dark hair and intense eyes, she radiated focused intelligence as she reviewed the evidence they'd gathered. This is substantial, she acknowledged, closing the folder. But Holloway will claim it's been cherry-picked or misinterpreted. I'd need independent verification of key points before my editor would greenlight publication. Such as? Marcus asked. The soil contamination data. I'd want samples collected under controlled conditions, tested by a lab with no connection to either side. Zoe made notes as she spoke. And more patients affected by the discrimination policy, ideally willing to go on record. Dr. Chen has identified 17 cases similar to Maria's, Rachel offered. We can approach them about interviews. Good. I'd also need documentation directly linking Holloway to the falsified remediation reports. Zoe looked up from her notes. The recording from your father is compelling, Mr. Wells, but by itself, it's not quite enough for the kind of story that would force action. Marcus felt his hopes fading. They had compelling evidence, but still lacked the smoking gun that would conclusively tie everything together. What about the hospital board? Rachel suggested. Several members must have known about both the contamination and the discrimination policies, and they're all Holloway appointees, Marcus added. Loyal to him. Everyone has a breaking point, Zoe noted, especially when facing potential criminal charges themselves. Find me a board member willing to flip on Holloway, and I can build a story that will stick. As they strategized, Assistant AG Morales entered with news. The State Environmental Protection Agency had agreed to conduct emergency testing at the hospital, based on the preliminary evidence. Teams would arrive tomorrow. This gives us legitimate state action to report on, Zoe said, immediately recognizing the opportunity. I can publish a preliminary story about the investigation without waiting for all the pieces to fall into place. That evening, Zoe's first article appeared online. State launches environmental investigation at Riverside Hospital amid contamination concerns. The piece carefully outlined the allegations without making definitive claims, but its very existence lent credibility to their case. By morning, the story had been picked up by television news. Cameras captured the arrival of state environmental officials at Riverside General, their white protective suits and equipment creating dramatic visuals that local stations eagerly broadcast. The hospital administration, caught off guard by the sudden media attention, issued a terse statement pledging cooperation with investigators while maintaining that patient safety had never been compromised. Mayor Holloway was conspicuously silent. His office canceled a scheduled press conference, citing a sudden scheduling conflict. He's regrouping, Marcus observed as he watched the coverage from the field office. Trying to figure out how to spin this. The mayor's response came that afternoon. not through an official statement but via selective leaks to friendly local reporters, suggesting the investigation was politically motivated by the governor's office, which had long opposed Holloway's development policies. But the narrative was slipping from his control. As environmental teams conducted tests throughout the hospital's East Wing, Dr. Chen held her own impromptu press conference on the hospital steps, surrounded by fellow medical staff, who had grown increasingly concerned about working conditions. For months, we've observed unusual patterns of illness among both patients and staff in certain areas of the facility, she stated firmly. Our concerns were dismissed or suppressed. We're grateful the state is finally taking these issues seriously. When a reporter asked about her termination, Dr. Chen was unflinching. I was fired the day after testifying about Maria Rodriguez's case. The timing speaks for itself. As media attention intensified, patients began coming forward with their own stories of denied treatments and unexplained symptoms. Elena agreed to a carefully controlled interview with Zoe, describing Maria's experience and the hospital's initial refusal to provide necessary care. My sister would have died without Mr. Wells's intervention, she said, her quiet dignity more powerful than any shouted accusation. How many others haven't been so fortunate? The question hung in the air, impossible to dismiss. By day's end, the hospital board called an emergency meeting. Marcus, Rachel, and Zoe waited outside the boardroom, watching members arrive with grim expressions. Something's happening, Rachel murmured as the meeting extended past its scheduled time. Nearly 3 hours later, the doors opened. Dr. Robert Langford, the chief medical officer who had testified reluctantly in court, emerged looking exhausted but somehow lighter. Dr. Langford, Zoe approached immediately. Can you comment on the board's discussion? The elderly doctor hesitated, then spoke carefully. The board has voted to implement immediate protective measures for patients and staff in the affected areas. We're also establishing an independent review committee to examine all treatment denials over the past 3 years. And Mayor Holloway's involvement? Zoe pressed. I cannot comment on ongoing investigations. Dr. Langford's professional demeanor slipped slightly, but I can say that the board has voted unanimously to cooperate fully with state authorities regarding both the environmental concerns and certain administrative decisions that may have prioritized financial considerations over patient welfare. It was as close to a public break with Holloway as they could hope for, the hospital establishment beginning to distance itself from the mayor as evidence mounted. The following morning brought the preliminary results of the environmental testing. The findings confirmed their worst fears. Significant levels of industrial chemicals remained in the soil beneath the East Wing, at concentrations far exceeding safety standards for a healthcare facility. Zoe's front-page story in the State Chronicle laid out the facts in stark detail. Tests confirmed toxic contamination at Riverside Hospital. State officials call situation deeply concerning. The public reaction was immediate and powerful. Hospital staff held a walkout demanding reassignment from the contaminated areas. Patients and families gathered outside the mayor's office with signs asking, "Did you know?" and "Who approved this?" Local television covered the protests extensively, interviewing concerned citizens and medical experts who expressed shock at the situation. National news programs began picking up the story, framing it as an example of regulatory failure and political corruption endangering public health. Through it all, Mayor Holloway remained uncharacteristically silent, issuing only brief statements, through his spokesperson claiming no knowledge of the contamination and pledging to get to the bottom of this disturbing situation. But the dam had broken. That afternoon, James Simmons, the hospital's lawyer and Holloway's longtime associate, contacted the state attorney general's office through his own attorney. Simmons wants to talk, Morales informed Marcus and Rachel. He's offering information about the land deal, the remediation certification, and Holloway's direct involvement, in exchange for consideration in his own case. He's turning on Holloway, Marcus realized. The first rat off the sinking ship, Morales nodded. And where one goes, others follow. 2 hospital board members have also reached out through counsel, suddenly eager to share what they know. As the day progressed, the pressure on Holloway intensified. The governor issued a statement expressing grave concern and directing additional state resources to the investigation. The federal EPA announced it would conduct its own review of the remediation certification process that had allowed the hospital construction to proceed. By evening, news helicopters circled Holloway's mansion, capturing footage of police vehicles arriving not to protect the mayor but to execute search warrants for documents related to the land deal and hospital governance. It's happening faster than I expected, Zoe admitted as she watched the coverage with Marcus and Rachel. Usually, these investigations take months to build momentum. The environmental angle changed everything, Rachel observed. People can debate policy and finances endlessly, but toxic chemicals endangering children and pregnant women, that creates immediate outrage. Marcus watched the unfolding scenes with mixed emotions. The justice he'd sought for Elena Rodriguez, and others like her, was finally arriving, but at a scale he hadn't anticipated when he first hung his fake law degree on the wall of a rented office. "What happens now?" he asked Morales, who had joined them to monitor developments. "Now we follow the evidence," she replied. "The investigation is expanding beyond Riverside, looking at other development projects Holloway was involved with, other officials who may have been compromised. And my role in all this?" Morales's expression softened slightly. "Your testimony remains crucial, Mr. Wells, as does your continued cooperation." As night fell, Marcus found himself alone at the window of the field office, watching as the lights of news vans continued to illuminate the streets of Riverside. For a small town unaccustomed to the spotlight, this sudden scrutiny was transformative, revealing truths long hidden in the shadows of power and influence. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Maria asked about you today. She's getting stronger. Thank you for everything." A simple message, but it reinforced what had become increasingly clear throughout this ordeal, that the connections he'd formed in Riverside weren't just part of a con. They were real and they mattered. Another text arrived, this one from Miguel. "You should see the school newspaper. I wrote an article about everything. Mr. Carson says I might have a future in journalism." Marcus smiled, picturing the teenager's proud expression. The image was quickly replaced by Holloway's face on the television screen as news programs continued dissecting the mayor's fall from grace. The man who had seemed invincible just weeks ago now appeared diminished, his carefully crafted image crumbling under the weight of revelations he could no longer control. Public opinion, once firmly in his corner, was turning decisively against him. It was a lesson Marcus understood all too well, that facades, however convincing, eventually give way to truth. His own carefully constructed identity had collapsed in that courtroom, exposing the fraud beneath. Now Holloway was experiencing the same painful revelation. The difference, Marcus reflected, was in what remained when the false front fell away. In his case, something unexpected had emerged, not just another con, but a genuine desire to right a wrong, to fight for something beyond his own survival. What would remain of Holloway when his mask finally fell completely? Only time would tell. But as the media spotlight intensified and more witnesses came forward, one thing was becoming increasingly certain. The mayor's reign over Riverside was approaching its end. The press conference was Rachel's idea. "We need to take control of the narrative," she argued. "Right now it's all about Holloway's corruption, which is important, but your story is getting lost in the mix. People still see you as either a criminal or a footnote." "Maybe that's for the best," Marcus countered. "My part in this is done." "No, it isn't." Rachel's expression was determined. "You've spent years hiding behind fake identities. Maybe it's time to stand in the light as yourself." The real Marcus Wells, now standing in the community center where the hastily arranged press conference was about to begin, Marcus felt acutely exposed. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious citizens, far more than he'd anticipated. In the front row sat Elena and Maria, the latter still looking frail but markedly improved. Behind them were Miguel, Vince, Dr. Chen, and several patients who had come forward with their own stories of discrimination at Riverside General. Even Robert Wells had appeared, standing quietly at the back of the room, his presence a silent acknowledgement of reconciliation begun but not yet completed. Zoe Parker had helped organize the event, ensuring a broad media presence beyond the local outlets that had initially dismissed their allegations. Her series of articles on the Riverside scandal had catapulted the story to national attention, forcing accountability where internal channels had failed. Rachel approached the podium, first, introducing herself as Marcus's legal representative. She provided a concise overview of the case, the hospital discrimination, the environmental contamination, and the web of corruption surrounding Mayor Holloway. "But today isn't primarily about those issues," she concluded. "Today is about transparency and accountability, beginning with ourselves." She turned. "Mr. Wells." Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward. The lights were blinding, the silence expectant. He placed his prepared remarks on the podium, then set them aside. "My name is Marcus Wells," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "And I am not a lawyer. I never attended Harvard Law School. I never passed the bar exam. The degree in my office was a forgery. The credentials I claimed were lies." Cameras clicked rapidly, recording his confession. "I came to Riverside as a con man, looking for easy marks and quick profits. I've spent years moving from town to town, assuming different identities, running various schemes. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's the truth." Marcus paused, looking directly into the cameras. "When Elena Rodriguez walked into my office with her sister's case, I initially saw it as just another opportunity. But as I learned about Maria's situation, how she was being denied life-saving treatment because of who she was and where she lived, something changed." He described his mother's death, the failures of the healthcare system that had set him on his path, and how Maria's case had awakened something long dormant in him. "I used deception to fight for Maria because that's all I knew how to do. I'm not asking for forgiveness or special treatment. I broke the law, and I'll face those consequences. But the evidence we uncovered, the discrimination at the hospital, the environmental contamination, Mayor Holloway's conflicts of interest, all of that is real, documented, and verified by state investigators." Questions erupted immediately. Marcus fielded them directly, refusing to minimize his deceptions or overstate his contributions. Yes, he had committed fraud. No, he had no legal training beyond some college courses and self-study. Yes, he expected to face criminal charges. "Mr. Wells?" a reporter from the Capitol called. "Why are you coming forward like this when you could potentially face years in prison?" "Because the truth matters," Marcus replied simply. "It matters in exposing Mayor Holloway's corruption, and it matters in acknowledging my own wrongdoing." Another reporter raised her hand. "Do you regret what you did?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I regret the deception. I regret building my life around lies. But I don't regret fighting for Maria Rodriguez or helping expose what was happening at that hospital. Sometimes right actions come from wrong beginnings." The questions continued for nearly an hour, ranging from probing to hostile to unexpectedly sympathetic. Through it all, Marcus maintained a calm honesty that felt foreign but strangely liberating. When the formal portion ended, Elena approached him, Maria at her side. "That took courage," she said quietly. "Not compared to what you've been through," Marcus replied. Maria, still thin but with color returning to her face, reached for his hand. "Thank you for saving my life. However it happened, I'm grateful." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself face to face with Zoe Parker, who had watched the proceedings with professional detachment. "That's going to make quite a headline," she observed. "The con man confesses. Just reporting the facts," Marcus said with a faint smile. "Facts are rarely so complicated." Zoe studied him. "You've given me enough material for a book, you know. The fake lawyer who exposed real corruption. The con man who found his conscience. Sounds melodramatic, but true." She handed him her card. "When the dust settles, we should talk. Your story deserves telling in full. The good, the bad, and everything in between." As Zoe left, Rachel approached, looking both proud and concerned. "Well, that's done. For better or worse, you've put everything on record. How bad will the consequences be?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, I don't know. The contempt charges are definite. The fraud and impersonation could mean significant time." She squeezed his arm. "But your cooperation with the Holloway investigation carries weight, and public opinion is shifting in your favor. The unlikely whistleblower narrative is gaining traction." The press conference had indeed changed the public conversation. Over the following days, opinion pieces appeared debating the ethics of Marcus's actions. Some condemned him as an opportunist whose illegal behavior couldn't be excused regardless of the outcome. Others portrayed him as a flawed hero who had used questionable means to achieve unquestionably positive ends. What no one could dispute was the avalanche of revelations his actions had triggered. As Holloway's former allies scrambled to distance themselves, they revealed additional layers of corruption, kickbacks, bribery, environmental violations stretching back years. The mayor himself remained uncharacteristically silent, communicating only through his increasingly beleaguered attorneys. His once imposing mansion became a virtual fortress, blinds drawn against the constant presence of news vans and protesters. 3 days after Marcus's public confession, Holloway finally responded with a press conference of his own. Looking haggard and defensive, he denounced what he called a coordinated smear campaign, orchestrated by political opponents. These allegations are distortions and exaggerations, he insisted, reading from prepared remarks. While some administrative oversights may have occurred under my administration, I categorically deny any knowledge of environmental hazards at Riverside General or discriminatory treatment policies. The denial might have carried weight weeks earlier. Now, with state investigations confirming the contamination and former associates providing detailed testimony about his involvement, Holloway's protests rang hollow. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Dr. Langford, who had initially been reluctant to challenge the mayor directly, released a trove of emails and meeting minutes documenting Holloway's personal direction of hospital policies, including explicit instructions to prioritize patients from certain neighborhoods and restrict expensive treatments for others. In good conscience, I can no longer remain silent, the elderly doctor stated in a written release. For too long, I allowed myself to be complicit in a system that violated every principle of medical ethics. While I cannot undo that complicity, I can ensure the full truth is known. The documents were devastating, establishing a direct link between Holloway's directives and patient outcomes, including several deaths that might have been prevented with proper care. Public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Protesters gathered outside City Hall demanding Holloway's resignation. The City Council, once firmly under his control, called an emergency session to discuss a vote of no confidence. State officials expanded their investigation to include potential criminal negligence charges. Through it all, Marcus watched from the sidelines, his own legal situation temporarily overshadowed by the accelerating collapse of Holloway's regime. The mayor, who had seemed invincible, now appeared increasingly isolated and desperate. The end came with surprising suddenness. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Mayor Holloway called yet another press conference. Reporters arrived expecting more denials and deflections. Instead, they found a man transformed by the weight of exposure. "Have failed this community," Holloway began, his voice lacking its usual confident resonance. "While I maintain that many of the specific allegations against me have been exaggerated, I cannot and will not deny that serious lapses in oversight occurred under my leadership." He acknowledged the environmental issues at the hospital, claiming he had been misled by technical experts but accepting ultimate responsibility. He admitted that hospital policies had unintentionally created disparities in care that he deeply regretted. Most significantly, he announced his immediate resignation as mayor, effective that afternoon. "Riverside deserves leadership untainted by controversy," he concluded. "I step aside now to allow healing to begin." The carefully crafted statement stopped short of admitting criminal wrongdoing, but its tactical retreat was clear. Holloway was sacrificing his position in hopes of mitigating the legal consequences still to come. As news of the resignation spread, Marcus received a text from Rachel. "Turn on the news, it's happening." Watching the coverage from his temporary housing at the field office, Marcus felt an unexpected emptiness. Holloway's fall should have been satisfying. The powerful man who had threatened and intimidated, now humbled by his own exposed corruption. Instead, Marcus found himself reflecting on how easily power could corrupt and how difficult accountability could be. His phone rang. Elena, her voice bright with vindication. "Did you see? He's finished." "I saw," Marcus confirmed. "This is because of you," she said. "Whatever mistakes you made, whatever your reasons were for coming to Riverside, you've changed things here forever." As he hung up, Marcus wondered if she was right. Had his deception ultimately served a greater truth? Or was he simply rationalizing years of dishonesty with one positive outcome? The questions had no easy answers. But as citizens gathered spontaneously in Riverside's town square, celebrating the fall of a corrupt administration and the prospect of more equitable healthcare, Marcus allowed himself to acknowledge that perhaps, just this once, his talent for deception had been put to genuinely good use. The Riverside County Courthouse looked different somehow. Not physically changed, but transformed by context. What had once seemed an intimidating bastion of authority now appeared more as it truly was, a weathered building housing an imperfect system, staffed by flawed human beings doing their best to approximate justice. Marcus sat at the defendant's table beside Rachel, watching as Judge Patterson entered the courtroom. The same judge who had seen through his deception now presided over the culmination of the scandal that deception had helped expose. Today marked the beginning of Mayor Holloway's trial, on 16 counts of corruption, fraud, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. The prosecution's witness list was extensive, including former hospital board members, environmental experts, patients who had suffered discrimination, and government officials who had been pressured to approve the contaminated land for development. And Marcus Wells, the unlikely catalyst whose fake law degree had somehow led to real justice. As the proceedings began, Marcus studied Holloway across the courtroom. The former mayor had aged visibly in the 3 months since his resignation. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, his once commanding presence diminished by scandal and scrutiny. Yet there remained something defiant in his posture, the stubborn pride of a man who still believed in his own righteousness despite mounting evidence to the contrary. The prosecutor, State Attorney General Cynthia Marshall, delivered a devastating opening statement detailing the web of corruption, negligence, and callous disregard for human welfare that had characterized Holloway's administration. This case is not about politics or personality, she concluded. It is about trust betrayed, lives endangered, and the deliberate subversion of systems meant to protect our most vulnerable citizens. Holloway's defense team countered with arguments focusing on his decades of public service, challenging the credibility of key witnesses, and suggesting that any mistakes had been errors of oversight rather than deliberate malfeasance. Richard Holloway dedicated his life to Riverside, his attorney insisted. To portray him as some cartoon villain, deliberately endangering patients for profit is not just unfair, it's unsupported by the evidence. As the trial progressed through its first week, Marcus attended whenever his own legal situation allowed. His fraud case was proceeding on a parallel track, with hearings scheduled around his testimony in the Holloway trial. The irony wasn't lost on him, the fake lawyer now a critical witness in bringing down a corrupt politician. On the trial's 4th day, Marcus took the stand. The courtroom was packed, reporters filling every available seat, eager to hear from the man whose deception had sparked the investigation. Mr. Wells, Attorney General Marshall began, please describe how you first became aware of potential discrimination in treatment approvals at Riverside General Hospital. Marcus detailed Elena's initial visit to his office, his investigation into the hospital's practices, and his discovery of the pattern of denials affecting East Side residents. He explained how his research had led him to uncover Holloway's pharmaceutical connections and eventually the contaminated land issue. And at what point did you realize Mayor Holloway was personally involved in these decisions? Marshall asked. When I found correspondence between him and the hospital board, explicitly directing them to prioritize certain treatments for patients from specific neighborhoods, Marcus replied. And later, when I discovered his connection to the company that had falsified the environmental remediation reports. During cross-examination, Holloway's attorney attacked Marcus's credibility relentlessly. Mr. Wells, you've admitted to numerous frauds and deceptions over the years, correct? Yes. You've created false identities, forged documents, and lied to countless people for personal gain. I have. Yet now we're supposed to believe you're suddenly a champion of truth and justice? The defense attorney's tone dripped with skepticism. Isn't it more likely you saw an opportunity to reduce your own legal exposure by offering up Mayor Holloway as a bigger target? Marcus considered the question carefully. I can't prove my motives to you. All I can say is that the evidence I helped gather has been independently verified by state investigators. Whether you believe I acted from self-interest or conscience doesn't change the facts of what happened at that hospital. But facts can be manipulated, can't they, Mr. Wells? You're an expert at that. Yes, Marcus acknowledged, which is why I've been careful to ensure that everything I've provided can be independently verified. My testimony isn't the primary evidence against Mayor Holloway. The documents, the environmental tests, the witness statements from hospital, staff, and patients, those tell the story regardless of what you think of me. The exchange continued for over an hour, with the defense attempting to paint Marcus as an opportunistic criminal exploiting the situation. Yet something unexpected emerged through the questioning. The more the attorney pushed Marcus to defend his actions, the more authentic and straightforward his responses became. By the time he left the stand, many in the courtroom had shifted their perception of him from simple fraudster to something more complex, a flawed individual whose deceptions had nonetheless served a greater truth. As the trial entered its second week, the prosecution presented its most damning evidence. Emails and text messages recovered from Holloway's devices showing his direct knowledge of the contamination and his efforts to suppress that information. We need this expansion approved, regardless. Of the environmental concerns, one email to Simmons read, "The remediation timeline is unacceptable. Find someone who can expedite the process." Another message, sent after the first patients began showing unusual symptoms, was even more explicit. Keep these cases isolated. No pattern recognition. If Chen keeps pushing, find a reason to review her privileges. Each revelation further eroded Holloway's claims of ignorance or oversight. When James Simmons took the stand as part of his plea agreement, the former hospital counsel detailed years of systematic corruption, with Holloway at the center directing every aspect. Nothing happened at Riverside General without the mayor's approval, Simmons testified. The treatment policies, the land deal, the cover-up of contamination risks. All of it was orchestrated by Richard Holloway for financial and political gain. Throughout the damning testimony, Holloway sat impassively, occasionally whispering to his attorneys but showing little outward reaction to the destruction of his reputation and legacy. On the trial's 10th day, Dr. Langford provided the emotional core of the prosecution's case, describing how hospital policies had changed under Holloway's influence. "We became a two-tier institution," the elderly doctor testified, his voice heavy with regret. Patients from certain areas received different standards of care. Treatments that were routinely approved for some were consistently denied to others. "And did you raise concerns about these policies?" Marshall asked. "Initially, yes, but over time," Dr. Langford paused, visibly struggling. "Over time, I rationalized. I told myself we were making difficult choices with limited resources. I convinced myself it was unfortunate, but necessary." "What changed your perspective, doctor?" Maria Rodriguez. His voice strengthened. "When Mr. Wells brought her case forward, when I saw the pattern laid out so clearly, I could no longer pretend what we were doing was ethical or justified. And then, when the environmental contamination was revealed," he shook his head, "I realized I had become complicit in something unconscionable." As the prosecution built its case, Riverside itself was undergoing transformation. An interim mayor had been appointed, the hospital board completely restructured, and a citizens' oversight committee established to monitor healthcare equity and environmental safety. Maria Rodriguez, now fully recovered, had become an unofficial spokesperson for patients' rights, working with community organizations to ensure others wouldn't face the same barriers to care she had encountered. By the third week, as the defense began presenting its case, the mood in the courtroom had shifted, from shock at the revelations to a grim determination to see justice served. Holloway's attorneys called character witnesses and technical experts, attempting to minimize his direct knowledge or involvement. But the weight of evidence against him proved difficult to overcome. When Holloway himself finally took the stand, his testimony blended defiance with carefully crafted contrition. "Were mistakes made during my administration?" "Absolutely," he acknowledged. "Do I regret not providing closer oversight of the hospital board and development projects?" "Of course. But at no point did I knowingly endanger patients or approve the use of contaminated land for healthcare facilities." During cross-examination, Attorney General Marshall methodically dismantled his claims of ignorance, confronting him with his own emails, text messages, and sworn statements from former associates. "Mayor Holloway," she asked toward the end of a grueling session, "given the extensive documentation showing your direct involvement in these decisions, are you asking this court to believe that everyone else is lying except you?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable without further damaging his already tenuous credibility. Throughout the trial, Marcus continued managing his own legal challenges. Rachel had negotiated a plea agreement reducing the most serious charges in exchange for his cooperation, but he still faced potential jail time for the fraud and impersonation. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for the week after Holloway's. Trial was expected to conclude, a deliberate sequencing that would allow Judge Patterson to consider the full context of Marcus's actions against the backdrop of the corruption he had helped expose. As the Holloway trial moved toward conclusion, Marcus found himself in an unexpected position. The very community where he had arrived as an opportunistic conman now viewed him with a complex mixture of gratitude, respect, and lingering wariness. Local coverage, initially hostile to the fake lawyer, had evolved to describe him as the unlikely whistleblower whose deception had ultimately served the public good. Even Judge Patterson, who had held Marcus in contempt for his courtroom fraud, now acknowledged the broader impact of his actions. Mr. Wells's methods were undeniably inappropriate and illegal, the judge noted during a pretrial conference in Marcus's case. Yet we cannot ignore that those same actions initiated an investigation that has revealed corruption of shocking scope and consequence. After 3 weeks of testimony, dozens of witnesses, and thousands of pages of evidence, Holloway's trial moved to closing arguments. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow rooms set up to accommodate public interest. Attorney General Marshall delivered a powerful summation, methodically connecting the evidence to each charge while emphasizing the human cost of Holloway's corruption. This case ultimately isn't about land deals or administrative decisions, she concluded. It's about Maria Rodriguez and patients like her who were deemed less worthy of care because of where they lived or what their last names were. It's about hospital workers exposed to toxic conditions without their knowledge. It's about a community betrayed by the very person elected to protect its interests. The defense's closing argument painted Holloway as a dedicated public servant, overwhelmed by the complexities of governance, a man who delegated too much authority without sufficient oversight but never intended harm. Has Richard Holloway made mistakes? Yes, his attorney conceded. Should he have provided closer supervision of those he trusted? Clearly, but the prosecution has failed to prove criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Marcus caught Holloway's eye across the courtroom. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness or understanding, but a mutual recognition of how completely their lives had become intertwined through conflict. 2 days later, the verdict came. Guilty on 12 of 16 counts, including the most serious charges of corruption, fraud, and reckless endangerment. The former mayor stood impassively as the jury foreman read the decisions, his expression revealing nothing of his inner thoughts. Judge Patterson scheduled sentencing for the following month and revoked Holloway's bail, citing flight risk given the severity of the convictions. As the fallen mayor was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, a final, powerful image of accountability, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought them both to this moment. The con man and the corrupt mayor, each facing consequences for their actions, yet with outcomes as different as their intentions had been. 6 months later, Marcus stood outside the Riverside Community Center, watching families gather for the grand opening of the new free medical clinic. Children chased each other across the lawn while volunteers distributed information about healthcare services now available, regardless of address or income. The clinic represented something of a phoenix, risen from the ashes of scandal, funded partly by the settlement from the class action lawsuit against Riverside General, and partly by state grants designated for underserved communities. Its mission was explicit: to ensure that what happened to Maria Rodriguez and others like her would never happen again. Nervous? Rachel asked, joining him at the edge of the crowd. A little, Marcus admitted. First day of community service. I still can't believe this is what Judge Patterson assigned. His sentencing had been a surprise to everyone. After Holloway received 15 years in prison for his crimes, many expected Marcus to face substantial jail time as well, despite his cooperation. Instead, Judge Patterson had taken an unusual approach. Mr. Wells, the judge had said during the sentencing hearing, your actions were unquestionably illegal and ethically indefensible. You defrauded this court and the citizens of Riverside by impersonating an officer of the law. Marcus had stood ready to accept whatever punishment came. However, Patterson continued, context matters. Your deception ultimately exposed corruption that might otherwise have remained hidden, saving lives in the process. While this does not excuse your crimes, it must be considered in determining appropriate consequences. The sentence: 3 years probation and 1,000 hours of community service at the new medical clinic. Using his considerable talents for persuasion and problem-solving in service to the community you once deceived. No one was more shocked than Marcus himself. You got lucky, Rachel had told him afterward. Patterson's making a point about justice being about more than just punishment. Now, watching the clinic opening ceremony begin, Marcus wasn't sure if lucky was the right word. The responsibility felt enormous, a chance for redemption he hadn't expected and wasn't entirely sure he deserved. Dr. Chen, who had been appointed the clinic's medical director, approached with a clipboard. Ready for your first assignment, Mr. Wells? As ready as I'll ever be, he replied. And please, it's just Marcus. His role at the clinic was administrative rather than medical, helping patients navigate insurance forms, assisting with grant applications, and coordinating outreach efforts, tasks that utilized his natural talents for understanding complex systems and finding creative solutions, but now directed toward helping others, rather than exploiting them. As he followed Dr. Chen inside, Marcus caught sight of Elena and Maria. In the crowd, the sisters had become central figures in Riverside's healing process, Maria as a patient advocate on the hospital's new oversight board, and Elena as a community organizer focusing on environmental justice. Across the lawn stood Vince, deep in conversation with Miguel. The retired paralegal had taken the teenager under his wing, providing guidance on his growing interest in law and social justice. Miguel had already been accepted to 3 colleges with pre-law programs, his experiences during the Holloway case, shaping his ambitions for the future. Even Robert Wells was present, standing somewhat awkwardly at the periphery. The relationship between father and son remained tentative, wounds too deep for easy healing. But they were talking again. Cautious conversations, rebuilding connections, long thought severed beyond repair. Inside the clinic, Marcus was struck by how different it felt from the imposing atmosphere of Riverside General. Here the waiting room was bright and welcoming, with comfortable seating and clear signage in multiple languages. Staff greeted patients by name, and the intake process was designed for clarity rather than intimidation. "Your desk is over here." Dr. Chen indicated a small office near the entrance. "You'll be the first point of contact for many patients, helping them understand their options, assisting with paperwork, making sure they don't fall through the cracks." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The conman who had exploited bureaucratic complexities now tasked with helping others navigate them successfully. His first case that morning was a young mother with 2 small children, recently moved to Riverside and unsure how to access health care for her family. As Marcus patiently explained the available programs, helping her complete applications and connecting her with the appropriate providers, he felt something unfamiliar. A quiet satisfaction entirely different from the adrenaline rush of a successful. By afternoon, he'd assisted a dozen patients, each interaction reinforcing the strange new reality of using his skills for transparent, legitimate purposes. When Rachel stopped by during her lunch break from her newly established legal aid office down the street, she found him deep in conversation with an elderly man struggling with Medicare paperwork. "You look like you belong here," she observed, after the man left. "Weird, right?" Marcus smiled. "Who would have thought the best use of my dubious talents would be actually helping people?" "I would," Rachel replied. "I remember that idealistic college student who wanted to change broken systems. He's still in there somewhere." As closing time approached, Marcus found himself reviewing the day with Dr. Chen. They sat in her office, going through patient files and discussing follow-up needs. "You did well today," she said, closing the last folder. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Low expectations are easier to exceed," Marcus joked. "True." Dr. Chen studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when I first learned who you really were, that you'd been pretending to be a lawyer, I was furious. I felt used, manipulated. That's fair. But then I realized something important. Your methods were wrong, but your instincts were right. You saw injustice and responded, however imperfectly." She gestured toward the clinic around them. "Sometimes good things come from complicated beginnings." Later that evening, Marcus walked through downtown Riverside, seeing the town with new eyes. The changes were everywhere, not just the physical transformation of the hospital, now under new management with comprehensive environmental remediation underway, but in less tangible ways as well. There was an energy to civic engagement that hadn't existed before, a renewed commitment to transparency in local government. The interim mayor had established citizen advisory boards for major decisions, and town halls regularly overflowed with participants. Riverside was healing, not by forgetting what had happened, but by learning from it, by rebuilding systems with accountability at their core. As he passed his former law office, now a community art space, Marcus remembered the day he'd hung that fake Harvard degree on the wall. He'd arrived in Riverside planning another temporary identity, another scheme to sustain his rootless existence. Instead, he'd somehow found something he'd stopped believing in years ago: purpose, community, a chance to make amends. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe Parker. Book outline coming together. Interview tomorrow still on. The journalist had indeed pursued her plan to write about the Riverside scandal, approaching it as a case study in systemic corruption and unlikely accountability. Marcus had agreed to share his perspective, determined that if his story was going to be told, it would be with unflinching honesty about both his deceptions and his eventual choices. Still on, he texted back, no more hiding. At home, the small apartment he'd kept despite its memories of brick-shattered windows and midnight threats. Marcus opened his laptop. An email notification showed his latest law school application had been received. Not Harvard this time, but a state university with a strong clinical program and a history of accepting students with unconventional backgrounds. The odds of acceptance seemed slim, given his record, but Judge Patterson had unexpectedly offered to write a letter of recommendation, arguing that Marcus's experiences provided a unique perspective on legal ethics and the practical impact of justice systems. The law needs more people who understand its power from both sides, the judge had said. People who've seen how it can both protect and harm, who recognize its limitations and possibilities. Marcus wasn't sure if law school would ever become reality, but the application itself represented something important, a commitment to pursuing legitimately what he had once only pretended to be. As he prepared for bed, he noticed Sophia's crayon drawing still pinned to his bulletin board. Thank you for saving my Aunt Maria. The childish misspelling and earnest gratitude remained a powerful reminder of how this unlikely journey had begun. His mother's photo sat beside it, Catherine Wells in healthier days, smiling with the son who had lost his way after her death. He liked to think she would approve of where he'd ended up, despite the crooked path that had brought him here. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the clinic early. A small line of patients had already formed outside, each with their own story, their own needs, their own struggles, with systems designed more for institutions than individuals. As he unlocked the doors and welcomed the first person inside, Marcus reflected on the strange irony that had shaped these past months. A lifetime of lies had led him finally to a place of truth. A career built on exploiting vulnerabilities had transformed into a commitment to addressing them. It wasn't a perfect redemption. His past remained what it was, the consequences of his choices still echoing through his life and others. But it was an authentic one, hard-earned through difficult revelations and genuine accountability. As he sat down with the first patient of the day, helping her understand options she didn't know existed, Marcus recognized that this, the simple act of using his knowledge to empower rather than deceive, might be the most honest work he had ever done. Sometimes he was learning, justice requires breaking the rules to fix a broken system, and sometimes redemption comes not from erasing past mistakes, but from ensuring they lead to something better. If you found meaning in this story of an unlikely hero who saved a sick mother from corruption and found his own redemption in the process, please like and subscribe for more tales that remind us second chances are always possible. Share this with someone who believes that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with one person willing to stand up for what's right, no matter their past mistakes.